segunda jornada de nuestra 15ª Conferencia Internacional. Hoy vamos a abordar a través de 2 charlas magistrales las expresiones del crimen organizado en Latinoamérica, junto a grandes invitados y autoridades que nos ayudarán a comprender y analizar las formas en las que podemos combatir la violencia. Saludamos especialmente al gobernador de la región metropolitana, señor Claudio Rego, al fiscal regional de la región metropolitana sur, señor Héctor Barros, y a la directora nacional del Servicio de Reinserción Social, señora Rocío Faúndes, y también a la investigadora y PhD en filosofía, la señora Elena Buti, y al doctor en ciencias políticas, señor Benjamin Lisi, quienes se encuentran acompañándonos en el día de hoy. También queremos agradecer a todos quienes nos están viendo desde distintos lugares del mundo, en Chile, América Latina, el Caribe, y hoy día, gracias a la traducción simultánea que tendremos, podrán vernos también de países que pueden hablar en inglés. En el día de hoy vamos a abordar la gobernanza criminal en Latinoamérica junto a excelentes autoridades y expertos. Y para comenzar, le damos la bienvenida y saludamos especialmente al gobernador de la región metropolitana, socio también en muchos proyectos que estamos desarrollando en conjunto, señor Claudio Rego, que nos va a entregar la primera charla del día de hoy. Gobernador, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Le damos la palabra.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Daniel, y a todo el equipo de la Fundación Paz Ciudadana por esta invitación. Saludo a todas las personas que se han conectado tanto en Chile como fuera de Chile. Y bueno, como decía Daniel, somos socios y aliados con la Fundación en algunos proyectos que estamos impulsando en la región metropolitana. Y en mi carácter de gobernador de la región metropolitana, voy a tratar de poner un poquito un contexto de cómo estamos viviendo en nuestra ciudad el fenómeno del delito, el fenómeno del crimen organizado, el fenómeno de la inseguridad, y cuál ha sido nuestra apuesta en el contexto institucional chileno para poder aportar con una visión estratégica no solamente al combate del crimen objetivo, sino también al fortalecimiento de las instituciones que tienen esta tarea. Voy a partir simplemente, esto se hace así, ya. Bueno, para quienes no lo saben, el año 2021, por primera vez se eligieron los gobernadores regionales en todo el país. Eso quiere decir que la figura del intendente, que era el representante del presidente en las regiones, designado por el presidente de la República, fue reemplazado por un gobernador o gobernadora elegido por la ciudadanía. Esto podría parecer un cambio menor, pero no lo es, porque de alguna manera pone en el territorio, en la región, la obligación de tener una estrategia regional de desarrollo y hacerse cargo tanto de los activos como también de los pasivos de cada región y de cada ciudad. En el caso de la región metropolitana de Santiago, como ustedes deben saber, Santiago es una región, un área metropolitana. Tenemos 52 municipios, 18 de los cuales son rurales y el resto son urbanos. Y tenemos claramente una dificultad para hacernos cargo de los principales dolores de la ciudad. ¿Cuáles son estos dolores? Bueno, ustedes se los pueden imaginar. El primero es la inseguridad, ya vamos a hablar de él, por supuesto. Está en toda la encuesta planteada como la primera preocupación de todos los ciudadanos, el aumento del número de delitos, pero sobre todo de la violencia de los delitos, altísimos niveles de inseguridad, que hace que este sea una de las grandes prioridades de nuestra gestión, a pesar de que atribuciones formales los gobiernos regionales no tienen en esta materia. El segundo es el cambio climático que estamos viviendo en toda América Latina y que por supuesto también genera temor, pero un temor de naturaleza muy distinta. El tercero es la desigualdad, y ojo que sí, esto sí que tiene que ver con el delito porque, como vamos a ver en un rato más, la realidad del delito en nuestra región y en nuestra ciudad de Santiago es muy distinta dependiendo el territorio o el área en que tú vivas. Las desigualdades urbanas de Santiago siguen siendo muy profundas y yo te diría que este es uno de los grandes dolores. Es más, yo te diría que la inseguridad y el cambio climático son nuevos rostros de la desigualdad, porque se viven de manera muy distinta en territorios muy distintos de nuestra región. Y por último, algo que es muy relevante también para el tema que vamos a conversar hoy día de seguridad, es la fragmentación. O sea, como ustedes ven en la parte izquierda de la pantalla, Santiago es un archipiélago de islas, que son los municipios. Tenemos 52 municipios, 34 de los cuales son urbanos. Y claro, cada alcalde o alcaldesa trabaja dentro de su ámbito comunal, pero muchos de los problemas que tenemos, como los que acabamos de mencionar, cambio climático, desigualdad, transporte, contaminación, no son comunales, son de toda la ciudad. Entonces, esta fragmentación territorial obviamente que dificulta el abordaje de temas que son complejos. Y por otro lado, como ustedes lo ven en la fotografía, que no es un fotomontaje, es de verdad, tú tienes distintos ministerios que intervienen en el territorio sin la debida coordinación. Aquí vemos un paradero arriba de una ciclovía. Bueno, eso ocurre cuando dos ministerios intervienen en el territorio y no se coordinan entre sí. Esta doble fragmentación de Santiago la hace difícil de manejar. Esta es una ciudad de 8 millones de habitantes que tiene enormes desafíos y problemas, y claramente la idea de este gobernador regional, que en el caso de Santiago tiene mucho el espíritu del alcalde mayor que tienen otros lugares del mundo, como el alcalde mayor de Londres, o el alcalde mayor de Estambul, o el alcalde mayor ¿cómo se llama?, de Buenos Aires. Son alcaldes que tienen que tener una coordinación con todos los niveles administrativos que tienen. Ahora, frente a esto, siempre hay dos tipos de aproximaciones. Una es que hay gente que dice que hay que hacer lo mismo que hacíamos siempre, pero de mejor manera. Y yo más bien sigo la idea de Einstein que para enfrentar el tipo de problemas que estamos viviendo, entre ellos la seguridad, tenemos que tener aproximaciones distintas y una manera de gobernar distinta. En el caso de Santiago no nos sirve un solista. ¿Ah? Es tan grande la ciudad, tiene tantos actores que un solista, no, una autoridad que pretenda hacerlo todo, ya sea del nivel nacional o del nivel regional, simplemente va a tener un mal resultado. Por eso que a nosotros nos gusta esta imagen, ¿ah? La imagen de una orquesta, ¿ah? Donde todos los actores, públicos, privados, de distintos niveles de gobierno, se coordinan para abordar un desafío común. Muchas veces hemos dicho, y en Chile se ha escuchado muchas veces, esto de que la única manera de enfrentar al crimen organizado es con un Estado coordinado. Bueno, la idea de una orquesta donde hay un director, que en el caso de una región debiera ser el gobernador democráticamente electo, que coordina a todos los músicos para poder llegar a buenos resultados. Ahora, ¿quiénes son estos músicos? Bueno, en el caso nuestro tenemos 34 consejeros regionales que son elegidos por la ciudadanía. Tenemos, como se ve en esta fotografía, 52 alcaldes y alcaldesas de todos los colores políticos, créanmelo. Para quienes conocen a los actores, los podrán identificar en la fotografía, pero yo les puedo asegurar que en esta foto están los alcaldes desde el Partido Comunista hasta los partidos más de derecha, trabajando, ojalá coordinadamente, para enfrentar los desafíos comunes. Y también están, algo muy importante, los distintos encargados. Esto que ustedes ven aquí es una fotografía de la red regional de encargados de seguridad ciudadana, que los reunimos, que trabajamos en conjunto, generamos redes. De hecho, una de esas redes la tenemos con la Fundación Paz Ciudadana. Entonces, esta es nuestra manera de enfrentar de alguna manera el desafío de gobernar una ciudad de 8 millones de habitantes. Y por supuesto, también alianzas estratégicas, hermanamientos con ciudades, estamos hermanados con el País Vasco, con Mendoza, con Antioquia, por supuesto con organismos internacionales como el C40, la CAF, Bloomberg Philanthropies y otras entidades que nos permitan tener las mejores prácticas del mundo para enfrentar los desafíos. Y por último, algo muy importante para nosotros, mucho terreno. Nosotros estamos convencidos que la cabeza piensa donde están los pies y en la medida que estemos en terreno, vamos a tener la posibilidad, obviamente, de conocer los problemas de una manera mucho más acuciosa. Ahora, entremos en el dolor que nos convoca en este seminario, que es el dolor de la seguridad. Una de las cosas que hemos visto, este dato es del año pasado, la verdad es que ya este año es un poquito más alto, vamos en 6,3 o 6,4 homicidios cada 100.000 habitantes en la región metropolitana de Santiago, una tasa internacional que nos permite comparar el delito más grave de todos. Ahora, una de las particularidades de Santiago, usted dirá, bueno, Santiago, comparativamente con otras ciudades, no es una ciudad que aparentemente por esta tasa es tan violenta. Sin embargo, como les comentaba al comienzo, hoy día tenemos en Chile y en Santiago en particular una realidad muy desigual. Es decir, si nosotros le hacemos un doble clic a esta tasa de homicidio, nos vamos a dar cuenta que hay comunas en el sector oriente de Santiago que tienen un homicidio cada 100.000 habitantes y otras que llegan a tener 13,8, ¿ah? Lo que entra dentro de la categoría de pandemia de homicidios. Uno de los problemas que tiene la región metropolitana es que efectivamente es la región donde más ha aumentado el homicidio en todo el país. Eso se refleja en el índice de la ENUSC en materia de sensación de inseguridad. Como ustedes ven, esto ha ido en aumento, tuvo un pequeño baja el año pasado, pero en general estamos en niveles muy altos de inseguridad o de percepción de inseguridad cercanos al 90%. Y eso creo yo tiene mucho que ver con lo que vamos a hablar en este seminario, de un tipo de violencia y de delincuencia, diría 2.0. No es lo mismo que te roben el celular en la calle, no es lo mismo que te roben la cartera o tu maletín, a que seas víctima de un asalto a mano armada o una encerrona en una autopista, y para qué decir que seas testigo o víctima de un homicidio o intento de homicidio. Lo que hemos visto en el caso de Santiago es un aumento explosivo del uso de armas de fuego. Hay claramente un mercado de armas que no ha sido posible regular. Yo en lo personal soy muy crítico del sistema de control de armas que tiene en nuestro país y que, como he señalado muchas veces, es también víctima de esta fragmentación. Es decir, así como tenemos un territorio que está fragmentado en 52 municipios y 20 ministerios que intervienen muchas veces sin la debida coordinación, también el sistema de control de armas chileno está fragmentado. El ejército tiene el registro a través de la Dirección de Policía Nacional, después tiene la inspección de parte de Carabineros y después tiene la PDI, que tiene parte de la investigación por parte de la huella balística de las armas usadas en delitos. Pero la verdad es que el sistema no está funcionando, ¿ah? Yo creo que esta no es una prioridad para el ejército. La Contraloría acaba de detectar serias fallas en la gestión misma del registro de armas chileno. Y con todos los elementos que tenemos hoy día de inteligencia artificial, perfectamente podríamos estar haciendo un trabajo de control de armas muchísimo más fino. Ahora, el IBIS, que es el sistema electrónico que por fin se está implementando con la huella balística de las armas que se han ocupado en delitos, ha permitido mejorar la persecución penal, pero la verdad sea dicha, el sistema de control de armas en Chile está haciendo agua por todos lados y requiere una reingeniería bastante profunda. Ahora, cuando vemos las víctimas de homicidios consumados, esto está por fiscalía, pero si las sumamos las de la región metropolitana, se darán cuenta que casi el 45% de los homicidios de Chile tienen lugar en nuestra región, en la región metropolitana. Por eso que nosotros hemos hablado de que estamos viviendo una crisis o una pandemia de homicidios en la región metropolitana, a pesar de que está desigualmente distribuida en la región, pero sigue siendo muy grave. Y en lo que va de este año, el primer semestre de este año, ese dato ha aumentado de manera muy, pero muy significativa. Ahora, ¿qué puede hacer? Si nos quedamos con este dato, es un dato bastante preocupante. Y ya les decía al comienzo que si bien los gobiernos regionales tienen, como se llama, una billetera, o sea, un presupuesto importante para la región, tiene el liderazgo político, coordinan a todos los actores, pero no tienen facultades formales. Entonces la pregunta que uno se hace es, ok, no tienen facultades formales los gobiernos regionales. ¿Qué hacen? Se quedan de brazos cruzados esperando que se las den. Hoy día, de hecho, hay un proyecto de ley que no se tramita, que está absolutamente detenido en el Congreso, que le otorga facultades a los gobiernos regionales en materia de prevención del delito. O bien, tal como diría Einstein, innova, hace alianzas, busca socios y impulsa un trabajo para combatir el crimen organizado y también para mejorar los niveles de seguridad de la población. Y lo que hemos hecho en Santiago es exactamente lo segundo, es decir, nos hemos puesto a actuar. ¿Qué es lo que hemos hecho? Primero, hemos apoyado a las instituciones. Carabineros de Chile está hoy día recibiendo cerca de 12.000 millones de pesos de parte del gobierno de Santiago en iniciativas muy distintas. Hemos entregado 95 vehículos nuevos, 20 de los cuales son blindados, precisamente por el nivel de fuego del crimen organizado. Le hemos comprado un helicóptero antiportonazos para poder perseguir ese tipo de delitos novedosos que tenemos hoy día en nuestro país. Le hemos financiado también un programa en formación de derechos humanos, le hemos renovado 40 salas de familia para temas de violencia intrafamiliar en las comisarías de Santiago y en estos días le estamos aprobando dos nuevos proyectos, uno que es la renovación del polígono de tiro en la Escuela de Carabineros y segundo, un laboratorio móvil criminalístico que estamos financiando en conjunto con el Ministerio del Interior. Como
With the
verán,
Ministry of Interior. You can see here that our first task was to support Carabineros to do their work, and even we have purchased state-of-the-art drones with technical cameras that allow them to fly during nighttime, and also anti-drugs firearms or arms that also helps fighting the organized crimes threats. This is the support we have granted to Carabineros de Chile. In the case of PDI, the non-uniform police force, we have contributed 28 billion pesos. You see there the bomb detection system, the most modern one in Chile. And we finance this together with bulletproof vehicles, protection gear for the staff, the same lab, and 4 different offices are located in San Ramon, Huachuraba, Quilicura, and Pueblo Agual, financed by the government of Santiago. We don't have powers, but we are supporting an institution that is so important, such as PDI, that has a leadership on investigation in Chile, specifically on organized crime. One of the most important things we have done with PDI, so people can understand this and how this is related to organized crime, is that we procure 27 quick induction equipment to seize homes. It has some hydraulic systems that it is required for it. And the operations of Los Trinitarios, which was an important operation, had 50 people detained with special measures. And 1,000 investigators will seize 100 homes in the metropolitan region. With this equipment, there was nobody harmed, neither from the detective sides nor this criminal gang called Los Trinitarios, which operated, you see the mayor of Cerrillos, in the Nuevo Amanecer village in Los Cerrillos. Another work we are conducting is related to one of the topics presented with jails that we will hear today. We are highly convinced that those who control the jails will control the streets. That means also to provide our gendarmerie system, the jail police force. We are contributing about 2 billion pesos with corporal scans, bulletproof equipment, and equipment. We are also conducting a pilot of taser guns to use them within the framework of organized crimes inside the jails. As you know, important part of the organized crime power is that once you stop the ringleader, if you do not cut off communication between the ringleader and the offenders, you will have this. So we need to support gendarmerie and also support this the idea that we need to have this high security jail, as Giovanni Catagle, mayor, discussed together with Fundación Paz Ciudadana, of this program of the European Union Pact Against Mafia, which is very important to have this idea of a hard jail where ringleaders will be completely cut off from their connections with the rest of their criminal gangs. We follow with the municipal prevention. Municipalities today don't have police forces, but they do have police teams. And what we are doing is to support the municipalities first with vehicles due to 2 homicides of police municipal inspectors' death and homicides. We're supporting them out of that with cameras, bulletproof vests, and helmets, as you see on the screen. In the next days, we will start with a fair experience of regional patrolling in the Alameda axis, which will be 24/7 patrolling, together with the municipality's support and the police forces. As you can see, we deeply believe on the preventive role of municipalities, as we should, as well as regional governments, and we are supporting with important resources for this to happen. The second important thing is situational prevention. Today, we have changed Santiago. 55,348 public lightning, more than 12,000 community alarms, and more than 3,000 cameras, adding more than 500 municipalities financed to different municipalities. And today we are creating the first integrated telemonitoring system in Santiago. If we don't do prevention in the territory, improving the urban sector, it will be difficult to decrease the sense of insecurity, but also the crime rates from these offenders. We have worked also with the officers, administrations, not financing, but doing the work, innovative work. With Paz Ciudadana Foundation and the South Zone, we have created this Metropolitan Observatory, especially for extreme violence cases or homicides. We have been working for 2 years with 12 municipalities, creating capacities, doing data analysis, and creating culture that crime prosecution should be able to be nurtured out of the information or the data that the communal players have, such as the municipalities. This has been successful work. And as well as this one, we have developed these 3 projects with the prosecutors' offices, with empowering different stakeholders with crimes against elderly, and also with criminal mediators, which is what we're doing with the Central North Prosecutor's Office. We're working with them, not just to do more of the same, but to innovate together with them, and with programs that will enable us to do a leap on crime prevention, but also on how to support those institutions that will do the crime prosecution. In the case of the victims of domestic family as well as the elderly, we can see that the district attorney office is not working because it's only for the witnesses of these victims in the trial, but there's no support to the victims, especially the elderly, female elderly especially. And one of our proposals as Santiago's government is to develop a comprehensive program for the victims in the metropolitan area from the regional government. We have worked with the communities as well. I'm convinced, and I understand one of the lecturers will talk about this, the way to fight the organized crimes and this recruiting of the youth we have in our country from these gangs is through the previous work. We have this non-violence leader program. We have school retention program. It's easier to retain someone at school than reintegrate this person. Reintegrate is cheaper than to treat them if detained. So we have strengthened the security committees, and Santiago today has more than 2,000 citizen security committees, and we are providing computers so they can communicate online with the police forces. We have been strongly working on mafia against hawkers or street sellers, and also directly on the police forces or the Ministry of Interior or through our governance. So you can realize that not just supporting the police forces on prosecution or the jails or municipalities or situational prevention or even municipal prevention, but also community prevention that for us, it's so important, so much so that we have invested almost 5 billion pesos in programs from the community. So the security committees will submit projects that are related to securities, community alarms, lightnings, cameras, all of that community work. It's been financed because we are convinced that an organized community is a safer community. And this is part of the orchestra that we're trying to build in the metropolitan region.
Now, I am fully convinced that in terms of security, we need all of you. So I would like to end my words so that the call that I do today for the government authority and the Congress is that they should understand that regional government, we are and we will be a key stakeholder. You have seen part of what we're doing in this first 20 minutes of presentation, but the truth is that it is much more. We're formulating a crime prevention policy of the metropolitan region. We are creating a graduate program for those who are in charge of security. So this is a summary. If you see, this 133 billion pesos invested for crime prevention and institutional strengthening and crime prevention. That type of images, which is one of the squares that Santiago has, as you might imagine, is the type of spaces that invite crime. There was a murder, very serious murder, heinous murder in this square in San Ramon district. What we did with the community was to transform this in that. And this type of public spaces, this type of place, safe, lights, filled with life, help us. It doesn't replace the work of the district attorney or the police force, but somehow help us to create an urban environment that should be friendlier. The same thing with the main road of our city, Alameda. That was the church, a heritage building, as you know, and the mere fact of recovering to having good shape, to invest, that showed that the state is present, gives a signal that crime prevention and combat for the organized crime, addressing the type of city we have. I would like to thank Paz Ciudadana Foundation, the possibility of telling you what we're doing. I always say that we do all this without any power. Imagine if we would have a power to do so, legal powers. We'll continue to work. And the task of security belongs to all of us, of this major orchestra. The only thing that I would add, Daniel, to end my words, is the relevance of international cooperation in these type of seminars, to listen to what has happened. I understand that what happened in Brazil, in the Brazilian jails, that give us a very strong signal of what we need to do in the Chilean jail, to listen how children are recruited in the population, in shanty towns, different areas of Latin America, because they're not at school. To listen, Judge Giovanni Tartaglia, that is a judge that says Chile still is on time. But you need to understand that the organized crime phenomenon. It's not Chilean. It is at the worldwide scale. And these are transnational crime organizations that have a level of perversion, of evil, of resources that you are not prepared. It is not only to fight a crime that has increased. It's another type of crime. That's why we, as a government of Santiago, we wanted to set partnership with all the stakeholders, national, international, public and private, institutional, from all different levels, because the fighting insecurity is a fight that belongs to the community. And we're not going to rest until we are able to have a better place for Santiago, and as we say in San Chile, to recover the city for people. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. The amount of projects that are being developed in Santiago is amazing. The commitments in terms of security give us hope, and is a role model, because it's true that the powers are not in terms usually in security, but in prevention. We do have responsibilities and powers, a legal power to do so. And to take those spaces is key, so as to improve the conditions of all the people. An honor for us to have you here in the conference. Thank you, and great to work with you. And we hope that in the future we can do joint projects in the future. Thank you again, Governor, for being with us. Thank you, Daniel. Greetings to all of you. I'm here to continue to collaborate in this important and relevant task that pertains to all of us. Thank you. We continue with our conference, and we greet Dr. Elena Butti. Benvenuta, Elena. She will be talking now about the involvement of young offenders, and the governor already mentioned about the need of addressing this subject also. So welcome, Elena. We can hear you now. And thanks for being with us today. Thank you, Daniel, and the whole team of Paz Ciudadana team. Can you see my PowerPoint now? Dedicado mucho tiempo a mi vida académica y profesional. Voy a comenzar con una breve presentación. Yo soy antropóloga y he estado trabajando tanto en la investigación y también en la práctica humanitaria por más de una década, con los jóvenes infractores que están involucrados en organizaciones criminales, tráfico de drogas, pandillas y otro tipo de situaciones que tienen distintos nombres, distintos contextos, pero es un contexto de marginalización. La mayor parte de mi trabajo etnográfico de investigación se ha hecho en Colombia, y hoy la reflexión básicamente va a ser la situación delictual en Colombia, pero ojalá nos ayude a visibilizar algunos problemas también. La transformación en el crimen organizado que estamos viendo en la región y lo que significa para la gente más joven que está involucrada en estas actividades criminales y delictuales. Antes de ir al contenido, quiero aclarar un poco qué es la etnografía, cuál es la metodología principal que nosotros como antropólogos utilizamos en nuestra investigación, porque es muy distinto de muchos de los otros excelentes charlas que han llegado a esta charla. No voy a hablar sobre los números o estadísticas. Básicamente, como etnógrafo, lo que hacemos es que nos metemos por un periodo de tiempo y vivimos lo más cercanamente posible con una población en particular. En mi caso, fue con los jóvenes adolescentes que estaban involucrados en el nivel más inferior de las organizaciones criminales en Colombia. Y nosotros queremos estabilizar con estos jóvenes un contacto a largo plazo, directo, diario, de manera informal. Este es el estudio. no se basa en entrevistas formales, registradas, tampoco en encuestas ni estadísticas, pero más bien nosotros vamos a una relación más profunda con un número, en mi caso, de estos jóvenes. Y es, de alguna manera, como pasar con ellos, estar con ellos, como lo hemos definido en la literatura que dice hangout en inglés. Creo que este tipo de trabajo en particular nos da perspectivas cuando estudiamos las poblaciones que son difíciles de abordar, ya sean estigmatizadas, o en el caso de estos jóvenes que están en conflicto con la ley, y puede haber quizás no es fácil para ellos que hablen en entrevistas, en colegios o cuando son institucionalizados en las prisiones. Por lo tanto, la investigación etnográfica puede ayudar para tener un entendimiento más granular de los patrones que surgen en sus vidas y también para ver cuál es la historia que se encuentra, qué pasa en el contexto o más allá. Después de esa línea de la historia y cualquier entrevista que les va a decir, ¿qué podemos obtener de una observación durable que va más allá de una narrativa, especialmente los adolescentes o los investigadores que son distintos, frecuentemente tienen una línea de historia que no es la imagen completa. Por lo tanto, creo que el trabajo etnográfico nos puede ayudar mucho. Y yo, en este caso, llevo 1 año y medio de trabajo etnográfico con los jóvenes en el punto inicial de la investigación durante mi doctorado y luego volvemos cada año, excepcionalmente después del año de la pandemia, que sigue la trayectoria de vida de la gente joven y ver cómo sus expectativas, sus proyectos, ambiciones se ven en la vida. Aquí tenemos un problema de audio. No se ve como contrapartes, sino como reflexión. Hay jerarquías dentro del crimen organizado, hay patrones del resto de la sociedad. Así que en otras palabras, en la parte visual, que es parte de esta, son ac- una fuerza negativa de la sociedad, no son, frecuentemente están, comparan algunas actividades societales y son de alguna manera atrapados en mecanismos de opresión. Y a través del examen de estas experiencias de las personas jóvenes en la parte inferior del crimen organizado, puedo demostrar este punto más amplio. Cuando hablamos del crimen organizado, estamos hablando de algo que no es distinto de nosotros, estamos hablando de una expresión de patrones culturales más importantes en nuestra sociedad. Y yo creo que lo pueda conversar al final de mi charla. Ahora, en primer lugar, veamos un poco al contexto global en el cual se inscriben estas vidas. Este es un contexto global donde la sociedad y también en particular el crimen organizado se transforman. Existe también una literatura a nivel global en Latinoamérica que habla sobre la transformación importante de las estructuras de las pandillas y las culturas a lo largo de la década pasada. Y en especial, muchos autores en el mundo han demostrado la participación de las pandillas y estos grupos de jóvenes, de gente marginalizada que orgánicamente emergen en lugares, y la participación de estos grupos en los mercados de las economías más desarrolladas y también, de alguna manera, han generado lo que algunos autores han mencionado como una tormenta corporativa en la generación de las pandillas, lo que significa que las pandillas a nivel global, y podemos hablar de los patrones globales, de hecho, esencialmente han mutado, de ser grupos orgánicos que emergen, que estén locales, horizontales, que de alguna manera están impulsados por la solidaridad entre ellos, grupos de hermanos, por así decir, o familias alternativas, han mutado a también a organizaciones jerárquicas derivadas por el mercado y a nivel global. Esta es la tendencia que también hemos visto en Colombia. Em, Después lo vamos a ver más adelante, pero mi pregunta al frente de esta tendencia, dada esta transformación, la pregunta es cómo esta transformación ha impactado la experiencia vivida de los jóvenes que hoy se unen a estas pandillas corporativas. ¿Qué significa? ¿Qué hace la experiencia a una persona joven que se acerca a este tipo de organizaciones? Por lo tanto, no estoy tan interesada ni tampoco voy a elaborar mucho sobre por qué la gente ingresa a las pandillas. Ya lo sabemos. Sabemos de la literatura que eso tiene que ver con la falta de oportunidades alternativas, familias disfuncionales, malos niveles de asistencia a la escuela, pero ¿cómo la experiencia más bien de estas nuevas pandillas se siente? ¿Qué encuentran estas jóvenes cuando llegan a las pandillas? ¿Y por qué muchos de ellos eventualmente se van después de ser adolescentes?
Los crímenes y por qué los adolescentes se unen a estas pandillas es con la ilusión, con la ambición capitalista de la emancipación social, trabajos pagos y trabajos.
Ahora, un poco con respecto al contexto colombiano en particular. Colombia en particular, es un buen territorio donde podemos explorar, donde tenemos esta transformación global que estaba hablando antes. Lo primero, la mención que tuvimos en la región, que llega a los 50, y hablamos sobre las galladas en español. Es pequeños grupos de jóvenes que como resultado de la urbanización, en las periferias, se comenzaron a apoyar. Y eran pequeños lugares donde hacían pequeños robos, hurtos, tenían algún tipo de consumo, pero no tenían alguna organización más amplia y tampoco dependían de nadie más.
Pero con el aumento del narcotráfico por el cartel de Medellín, teniendo a Pablo Escobar y también la entrada de los paramilitares en la dinámica de la ciudad, emergen estas pandillas de jóvenes orgánicas que están parte de estas grandes estructuras y trabajan con armamentos de mayor estructuras, gobernadas por estos ideales más grandes o impulsores económicos. Esto significa que hoy lo que llamamos en inglés una pandilla o gang son parte de una un tipo de estructura jerárquica como un pulpo, mucho más grandes. Y en la región hay grandes organizaciones de delincuencia como las autodefensas gaitaniscas, los que son expertos de Colombia, o las oficinas de brigada. Son grandes organizaciones que están gobernadas o lideradas por adultos y con adolescentes. En la ciudad tenemos razones que es más pequeñas esta pandilla. Esta relación no es una relación militar o vertical que responden directamente a una orden, sino que es una relación que se caracteriza como una franquicia. Las pandillas más pequeñas son parte de la estructura de las más grandes como servicios claves, como narcotráfico, comisión de asesinatos. Sin intercambio, las estructuras más grandes dan a estas pequeñas pandillas acceso a drogas, armas, protección, pero también esencialmente la capacidad de usar el nombre y el logo de esta organización más grande. Hacen como marca de criminales. Por ejemplo, decimos que somos los lobos, un nombre de una pandilla de barrio, y pueden decir hoy que son parte de esta gran organización internacional. Entonces, tienen importancia dentro de este contexto donde están operando. Las pandillas, las de barrios, también son altamente jerárquicas. Vemos los duros como los jefes. Generalmente son adultos de 30 o 40 años que no han ido a la cárcel. Y luego hay un nivel medio de administración. Y luego las tareas claves, como los gerentes de plaza, administrador de la plaza, administra el tráfico de drogas en un área específica, asesinos especializados como los sicarios, observadores del barrio, los que ven en moto. Y luego, por debajo de esto, tenemos otro nivel, que es el nivel de participación donde yo me centro, que está compuesto de adolescentes principalmente, entre 10 y 15 años, que desarrollan tareas muy nivel bajo, pero esenciales, como tráfico de drogas, ser el observador, por ejemplo, cuando llega la policía, esconder las armas, esconder drogas, o ser un carrito, llevar droga de un lugar a otro y ni siquiera sabiendo qué es lo que llevan en la bolsa que están llevando, y muchas otras tareas ad hoc. Estos jóvenes, los que están abajo del nivel donde yo trabajo, son los principales consumidores de este mercado de drogas también, porque a menudo compran drogas para ellos mismos y también se les paga en parte con drogas. Entonces, si tienen una comisión o tienen que hacer un trabajo, es parte del pago, se les da en drogas. Entonces lo mezclan dependiendo de la droga y crean este tipo de adicción física y social y económica dentro de esta estructura que ellos son parte. Me parece que muchas intervenciones, mucha investigación ignora esta área más amplia gris, estas pequeñas tareas que se hacen en estas pandillas, que se llama el área gris, y no ha sido el enfoque de la prevención. Es ahí donde, en cuanto a los números, es donde se centran las pandillas. Generalmente se centra en la porción más grande de la pandilla o los asociados a estas. Y también aquí es donde la prevención puede ocurrir con más probabilidad y tenga más efecto. Lo interesante es que hay muy poca movilidad de hacia abajo hacia arriba. Entonces, si usted comienza como un expendedor o compañero, usted tal vez llega a mando medio a nivel de sicario, pero es difícil ser el duro o el jefe o escalar aún más dentro de la estructura de esta organización. Hay muy poco de esto porque está relacionado, y es interesante para aquellos que les gusta ver el caso de Medellín, que se relaciona el hecho de que hay menos muertes en el crimen organizado en Medellín. Hay una gran narrativa de la transformación de Medellín y el urbanismo de las políticas relacionadas a estas políticas sociales para reducir el crimen. Es cierto que hay mucho menos que los 90. Mucha investigación se muestra que son treguas más bien entre las pandillas que efecto de las políticas. Pero lo que es seguro es que no ha desaparecido el crimen organizado. Entonces, si hay menos, las personas con más edad en la pirámide se mantienen, ya sea que estén en la cárcel o no, pero tienen más poder. Tienen altos salarios que se mantienen y significa que el costo general de esta estructura es mucho más alto. Significa entonces que es como en una empresa con muchos jefes o gerentes. La gente de abajo se le debe explotar más. La gente de abajo deben haber más y más explotados. Y es por esto que los jóvenes que comienzan abajo hoy realmente no pueden escalar en la pirámide y no rápido tampoco. Me centro en estos jóvenes específicos, los que están en el nivel más bajo. Y en inglés yo lo llamo gang involved, más que participan en las pandillas, más que ser miembro de la pandilla, porque no se les considera miembros. Como un residente local me dijo, mira, simplemente son niños adictos a las drogas que pasan el tiempo ahí, roban, hacen cosas cuando uno le pide, pero no dependen completamente de la pandilla y no tienen un pago fijo. A veces pasan el tiempo ahí y la pandilla les deja hacer eso, porque mientras más malos chicos que vean, mejor. Tener estos niños ahí es bueno para la pandilla porque determina su presencia y atrae a más. Pero ser parte de la pandilla, sino que usan terminología más triste como parchar, camellar, trabajar de manera informal o andar, pasar el tiempo ahí con ellos. Estos matices lingüísticos son interesantes porque sugieren una noción de participación en la pandilla que es mucho más de aprender y fluir que la imagen popular de la pandilla, esta imagen de estas drogas grandes en Norte Centroamérica que se muestran, por ejemplo, con grandes rituales de iniciación o uniones de sangre entre hermanos. Lo que yo digo es que esta imagen ciertamente se debe a la participación de las pandillas que ocurre en la pandilla y en países especialmente como Colombia, México o Brasil, donde las pandillas están tan entrelazadas con el crimen organizado. El nivel de bajo participa de una manera más fluida y más borrosa, diría. Lo que he visto en mi contexto es lo que llamo un modelo de participación flexible. Esta es una participación muy flexible con estas organizaciones y hemos tenido las barreras de entrada, que es una de, como me contaron, no fue difícil entrar para nada. Fui, hablé con el duro y me dijo, bueno, si quieres pasar el tiempo aquí, participa. Parcharse como el término colombiano. Y así empecé. Entonces no había ningún ritual de iniciación o prueba de su valentía. Es muy fácil trabajar en esta estructura. Otra cosa positiva es que al inicio no hay un compromiso real, no le piden lealtad. Otro de los jóvenes me dijo que yo simplemente era un traficante. Yo estaba a nivel bajo y me daban drogas y las vendía, les reportaba a ellos. Pero si quería irme, yo podía, no había ningún problema. Y esto es un nivel de entrada muy bajo. Los jóvenes no sienten que tienen que dar el resto de su vida o tener una participación completa con ellos, sino que hacen un poco de dinero de bolsillo para probar y ver cómo les va. Y esto facilita la participación de ellos. Y a nivel bajo, tienen libertad de decidir si aceptan o no una tarea, como ellos me decían. Si quería irme, podía. Entonces eso les daba a los jóvenes esta ilusión de una cierta nivel de participación, de determinación, porque hay personas que son muy marginalizadas, que no han disfrutado mucho de tener este sentido de agencia, de propiedad sobre sus vidas. Entonces les dicen, haga lo que quiera, no tenemos problema. Y eso es como comienza. Pero este modelo flexible también tiene algunos lados negativos. Y lo primero es que tiene esta separación del resto. Y uno de estos jóvenes me decía que básicamente su trabajo era esconder a los duros, a los jefes, esconder las armas de los jefes y llevarlas cuando ellos lo necesitaban. Y cuando le preguntaban, ¿tú sabes qué hacen estos jefes, los duros, qué hacen con las armas? Y me dijo, no tengo idea. Entonces, no es la única instancia. Muy a menudo estoy pensando aquí las maras o cómo hay esta separación de ellos, que este tipo de enajenación, pero son una estructura amplia y saben vagamente del producto final. No hay una participación emocional o el sentido de pertenencia de estos negocios que se están desarrollando.
En segundo lugar, también, a diferencia de otros lugares de la cadera de los duros para arriba que tienen un salario, ¿no es verdad? Que es de hecho un salario informal. Estos niños de hecho se les paga por tarea y en especie, frecuentemente con más drogas, ¿no? Y una de mis interlocutores me dijo que me pagan la mitad en dinero y la mitad en drogas. Si puedo vender todas las drogas, puedo mantener lo que gané de la mitad que era mía, para mí mismo, ¿no? Pero nunca lo puedo hacer. Al final lo fumo. Yo mismo me fumo la droga y eso me hace querer más. Por lo tanto, gasto el poco dinero que tengo en más drogas y por lo tanto al final no me queda con nada. Por lo tanto, lo que hemos visto acá es un mecanismo que genera un ciclo vicioso de dependencia, donde estos jóvenes crecientemente, económicamente y socialmente y físicamente se vuelven dependientes bajo estos labores criminales. De hecho, se vuelven adictos, que eso es difícil de sostener si no continúan participando en estas actividades ilícitas. Finalmente, y esto es lo que encontré particularmente eh, problemático, el riesgo que ellos tienen es a nivel individual. Si, por ejemplo, si la policía les confisca la droga, parte de las drogas que están vendiendo, las organizaciones criminales no responde por esa droga. Es la persona, el joven que tiene que responder por la droga que le confiscaron. Por lo tanto, lanza a estos jóvenes a una deuda con sus empleadores criminales y delictuales. Uno de mis interlocutores me dijo, si quiero salir de esto, puedo, pero es complicado. Todavía le debo a los duros dinero porque la policía me pilló. Cuando la policía me pillan, me quitan las drogas y esto me dejan deudas con ellos. Ayer el jefe me dijo que prestara atención porque si no le pago, yo puedo perder mi vida. Así es que este tipo de relación de explotación que también le deben esa mercancía que están vendiendo y por lo tanto no es tan fácil para ellos salir como lo podrían pensar. Y esta es una expresión que hemos escuchado de manera provocativa, pero estos son los geek gangsters o los gangsters de la economía geek, estos jóvenes que realmente no son parte de la pandilla, pero trabajan para ellos, que de alguna manera son parte de los deliveries, por ejemplo, pero no trabajan para ellos. S- Por lo tanto, mientras más veo este tipo de modelo de cómo se relaciona yo, más me parece que este patrón se asemeja a un modelo de negocios muy liberal dentro de la economía liberal, que es la economía geek. Esto no era algo que solían utilizar antes. Es una analogía que inicialmente utilizaron en las presentaciones para hacer el patrón de cómo se relaciona. Pero al fin y al cabo me pareció analíticamente interesante porque creo que habla sobre la conexión que se da entre estos cambios culturales que se dan en la sociedad y la economía, y que cómo se refleja en el mundo del crimen organizado, que enfatizo, no es un mundo separado, hecho de distintas personas, sino más bien refleja patrones que nosotros vemos en este tipo de estructura. Dentro de los modelos de la economía geek, yo sé que ustedes son conocen mucho Uber, Delivery, o Globo, o Rappi, ¿no es verdad? Que es tan común en Latinoamérica Dentro de estos modelos, las empresas no emplean a sus trabajadores, sino más bien se relacionan a través de una plataforma y una relación de contratistas. Por lo tanto, a los trabajadores no se les paga un sueldo, sino se les paga por los gigs. Y este tipo de pandillas y la plataforma de la economía gig le da a los trabajadores un sentido de autonomía, bajos requisitos de entrada y la habilidad de ser su propio jefe, entre comillas, ¿no? Entonces le da agencia sobre el trabajo, trabajo donde quiero, hago el dinero que gano, tengo mi propio tiempo, lo manejo como yo quiero, etcétera. Pero esto frecuentemente llega a expensas de la protección o cualquier derecho de protección o bienestar, un bajo sentido de pertenencia a la empresa y también de realizar tareas que a uno le importa muy poco. Obviamente, aquí quiero hacer una exención de responsabilidades. Me gusta esta similitud entre estos modelos que yo llamo las pandillas liberales y los modelos de negocios neoliberales. Yo no apunto a que sean iguales por ninguna forma. Hay un mundo de diferencia entre una adolescente y una persona y un conductor de estos modelos aquí. Pero la diferencia, yo creo que hay similitudes que también se nos pasan por alto. Y al hacer este paralelo, mi propósito es subrayar cómo estos nuevos dispositivos de trabajo laborales, ya sea dentro de las economías legales o ilegales, resultan en una aparente flexibilidad, pero también una explotación de facto de los trabajadores. Y de manera más amplia, esta analogía ilustra cómo el neoliberalismo, tanto como un modelo económico, así como también un sistema valórico, se refleja dentro de las economías legales e ilegales. Se vuelve cada vez más común en las sociedades latinoaméricas contemporáneas o en el mundo. Entonces vemos cómo estas pandillas jóvenes, de alguna manera son el reflejo de nuestra sociedad, un producto de los cambios culturales y transformación socioeconómica que caracterizan nuestros tiempos. Ahora, el lado oscuro de esta flexibilidad es que uno puede ser reemplazado fácilmente. ¿Cuán fácil es quitarle la vida a estos jóvenes? Esa es la manera. Porque no solamente son estos adolescentes, se les quita todos los derechos laborales, si alguna vez hubo derechos laborales dentro de las pandillas, ¿no? Que obviamente no habían desde el punto legal, pero pandillas de alguna manera eran protegidos los miembros de la pandilla por sus hermanos y tenían un sentido de colectivo. En las pandillas colectivas la gente no tiene ese sentido de protección, pero también están en alto riesgo de morir, porque fácilmente los pueden amenazar o incluso matar por esas personas más arriba en la jerarquía. Entonces, de hecho, cuando estos jóvenes se convierten en que están muy visiblemente involucrados en las drogas, como resultado de su adicción, desarrollan otros tipos de adicciones más duras. U- Entonces, ellos de hecho los matan a través de estos fenómenos que se llama limpieza social en Colombia, por las pandillas mismas. Entonces, las pandillas operan como un tipo de institución que mantiene el orden, un aparato. Y es paradójico que es la misma pandilla que de alguna manera le dio a estos niños las drogas para que la vendiera y a la vez los niños se volvieron adictos. Después ellos los amenazan y los matan. Pero es como un rol funcional para estas organizaciones, porque al fomentar estas masas de adolescentes adictos, estos grupos generan el pánico moral que ellos mismos han establecido para después contenerlo. Para decirlo en términos simples, nosotros estamos tan obsesionados hablando de la violencia juvenil y que los jóvenes son violentos y realmente pensamos que nosotros deberíamos cambiar el debate para hablar sobre la violencia en contra de los jóvenes y reconocer el hecho que para un joven que matan, hay cientos de jóvenes que los matan. Y en las últimas décadas hemos visto activistas, académicos e incluso gobiernos que están creando conciencia y generando la movilización, la violencia en contra de las mujeres, que de alguna manera hay cambios políticos, pero no vemos todavía la misma preocupación en la violencia en contra de los jóvenes. Los jóvenes, especialmente este tipo de adolescentes marginalizados que están en conflicto con la ley, que están empoderados, y tampoco los protege el sistema. Estas son las víctimas más importantes de esta estructura. Son los que mueren más frecuentemente y son los que, cuyas muertes frecuentemente son legitimadas, se toman como naturales, porque por algo lo mataron. Estaban involucrados haciendo algo. Estuvo bien matarlo, piensa la gente. Pero lo que quiero resaltar es que realmente son asesinados porque están atrapados en el sistema de precariedad y explotación criminal laboral. Entonces, ahora enfocando a las conclusiones, porque creo que ya estoy un poco pasada en el tiempo, nosotros hemos visto acá y en la precariedad de estas vidas jóvenes. Existe una precariedad laboral, en el sentido de que no tienen derechos laborales, pero también existe precariedad ontológica, lo que significa que sus vidas son desvalorizadas, se les considera inútiles y de alguna manera se les puede quitar rápidamente. Y conceptualizo entonces este estado de precariedad doble como un estado de precariedad aumentada. Y también son, de alguna manera, la vida de uno y el trabajo de uno que ya no es necesario. Mi trabajo no es importante, mi empresa me puede echar en cualquier momento, mi pandilla me puede echar en cualquier momento y también me pueden matar en cualquier minuto, porque mi vida no es tan valiosa. Esta es la condición sociológica donde esta gente se encuentra atrapada. Y es por eso, y es parte de otro proyecto que podemos hablar después en la sesión de preguntas y respuestas, es por eso que realmente que tenemos que comenzar a hablar de los juvenicidios, tal como hablamos de femicidios, el asesinato de las mujeres que están vinculados a un sistema patriarcal de opresión. Si una mujer es asesinada, no es solamente un homicidio normal, es un homicidio vinculado a un sistema de opresión. También pienso que cuando estos jóvenes son asesinados, no es un asesinato común y corriente, es un homicidio que se construye sobre un sistema más amplio de precarización de las vidas jóvenes, que son vidas precarias y pueden ser asesinados fácilmente y la sociedad se olvida de ellos. Ahora, ya yendo a la conclusión, algunas reflexiones. ¿Qué significa esto para la política y la práctica? Yo no soy un experto en política y los académicos siempre hacen recomendaciones que son difíciles de poner en práctica y de alguna manera espero sus preguntas y comentarios porque sé que hay muchos expertos en políticas en el público y otros panelistas. Pero yo creo que todo esto importa para la violencia y prevención del crimen y del delito. Porque si comprendemos mejor la vida de los jóvenes involucrados en el delito, tenemos mejores programas que puedan abordarlos, sus dilemas y sus aspiraciones. Esto comienza de la rehumanización de esas vidas. No debiéramos verlos como problemas, como números en las prisiones, debiéramos verlos como personas, seres humanos. Y debiéramos dejar de pensar que el problema son los jóvenes. El problema es el sistema en el cual se encuentran atrapados. Los jóvenes aprenden del sistema. Son, de alguna manera, ser jóvenes es una de las edades cuando absorbemos el contexto de manera más amplia. Notablemente, la preocupación sobre los peligros o los jóvenes sin leyes, el pánico moral que se da contra ellos en Colombia, hasta ahora no ha podido traducirse en programas efectivos para apoyar a estos jóvenes. Y existen tres enfoques comunes que tienen un lugar en Colombia y en Latinoamérica. Y voy a conversar cada uno de ellos. Primero, es la represión. A pesar de que se ha mejorado o que no es efectivo por mucha literatura, es ver cuánto políticas de mano dura todavía se practican en Latinoamérica. La represión se basa sobre el supuesto que estos jóvenes son personas anárquicas que necesitan normas más estrictas y más moral, pero cuando consideramos sus experiencias vividas, y espero haberles dado yo algún punto de vista al respecto, nosotros podemos ver cuán ah, desequilibrada este supuesto. El mundo que los jóvenes está altamente regulada, están al nivel más inferior de la fuerza laboral de personas que son muy explotadas. Por lo tanto, definitivamente no podemos decir que les faltan reglas en sus vidas. Con esta perspectiva, se convierte evidente que esta represión no es necesariamente lo que podría ayudarles. Un segundo enfoque común ha sido una rehabilitación psicológica. Esto es ciertamente un tipo de intervención más blanda y podríamos decir una que produce menos daño. Pero aún, creo que la historia de estos jóvenes demuestra que el tratamiento individual puede ser útil, pero se pasa por alto los paisajes económico, político, cultural, donde la participación delictual se describe. Por lo tanto, uno puede ayudar, todos podemos beneficiarnos de una ayuda psicológica y definitivamente se nos puede proporcionar, por ejemplo, tratamiento y apoyo psicológico sin costo, puede ayudar a los jóvenes individuales, pero no cambia el sistema. Y aquí realmente estamos hablando de un sistema. Entonces podemos tomar uno o dos jóvenes del grupo fuera, pero va a haber otros que se van a unir al mismo sistema. Y el problema con este tipo de paradigma rehabilitador es que frecuentemente termina autologizando a las personas como pasivos, sin esperanza, mientras que los patrones culturales más amplios no los toman en cuenta. Y tampoco toman en cuenta las aspiraciones de estos jóvenes, la agencia. ¿Qué puede hacer esta gente en contra? El tercer enfoque, y creo que esto está en la dirección más correcta, es la idea de oportunidades alternativas. Bajo el supuesto que estas alternativas están disponibles, la gente ya no quiere ir a esta idea delictual. Y esta idea va en la dirección correcta, pero la alternativa al delito, en la mayor parte de los casos, son igualmente precarias. Por lo tanto, un trabajo de baja paga como trabajo de la construcción o como muy intervenciones de organizaciones internacionales, este tipo de capacitación de emprendedores que dura algunos meses, pero no les proporciona apoyo sólido para establecer un negocio. Estas intervenciones no van a ir mucho más allá, porque estos jóvenes buscan un relacionamiento como uno de muchas estrategias. Por lo tanto, pueden seguir su capacitación de emprendimiento, pero una vez cuando termine este apoyo, si no tienen un plan sólido, van a volver a ir a encontrar algo distinto.
Creo que cualquier solución a largo plazo debe centrarse realmente en el empleo sólido, que no sea explotativo. Reformas estructurales, incluyendo la redistribución, invertir en las oportunidades educacionales para todos los jóvenes, no solo los que les va mejor, como se hace hoy en Colombia, y mejor educación profesional. También descriminalizar el tráfico de drogas a los niveles más bajos, entre otras intervenciones. Lo interesante, y con esto concluyo, es que los sueños de estos jóvenes no son fuera de otro mundo, son simples y me impactó esto realmente. Todos estos niños quieren ser actores de películas o futbolistas y que viven en este mundo y cuando uno ve a sus pares y me cuentan sobre a quienes admiran, siempre toman ejemplos que son sobrecogedores. Por ejemplo, quiero ser como mi amigo que tiene una tienda de ropa, o quiero abrir mi panadería, o quiero ser un barbero, por ejemplo. Y se convierten mucho más realistas sus sueños. Y de hecho muchos de ellos pasan sus años de adolescencia y se dan cuenta lo poca movilidad y oportunidades que tienen y existen vivir en la delincuencia. Y muchos de ellos no están en el hospital o encarcelados, abandonan la participación en la delincuencia y tratan de alguna u otra forma de ganarse la vida que sea humilde, honesta y más tranquila. Con poca ayuda podrían hacer esto mucho antes y ver el descontento de estos jóvenes en esta vida de la delincuencia y ayudarles a poder salir de esto antes y de una mejor forma es lo mejor que podemos hacer y es mucho mejor que encerrarlos en los centros de justicia de juveniles o de rehabilitación. Más que ver el problema, deberíamos ver el potencial que existe y finalmente deberíamos dejar de juzgarlos por lo que son y tratar de ayudarles a que sean lo que ellos desean ser. Y con eso termino.
Muchísimas gracias, Elena, por tu presentación. Bueno, más allá de lo evidente, las capacidades comunicacionales de Elena y de la profundidad de la investigación que ha hecho en Colombia y lo iluminadora, que son los resultados para la toma de decisiones. Contarles también que Elena es investigadora en el Instituto de Estudios Internacionales de Ginebra, que tiene un PhD en filosofía y un postdoctorado en estudios internacionales, que sus estudios, bueno, como se evidencia en su presentación, se ha centrado en el crimen organizado y en particular en el involucramiento de jóvenes, migración y desarrollo urbano. Y además de su cargo en el Instituto de Estudios Internacionales, es secretaria general de la Sociedad Suiza de Estudios Latinoamericanos y profesora visitante de la Facultad de Humanidades y Ciencias de la Universidad Nacional de Colombia. Así que, Elena, todos estos pergaminos quedaron absolutamente demostrados en la tremenda exposición que nos diste y en la invitación que nos haces finalmente de cómo podemos transformar en políticas públicas este conocimiento y cómo el implementar correctamente políticas públicas, porque el problema es que muchas veces las políticas públicas no es que no se dejen de implementar. Hay decisiones políticas que se toman para estas problemáticas. La misma ciudadanía presiona permanentemente para que se hagan acciones y los gobiernos hacen acciones. El problema es que si esas acciones no tienen un fundamento y no tienen este conocimiento profundo como el que tú has desarrollado en Colombia, nos podemos equivocar. Y equivocarnos en esto tiene costos no solo hoy, por muchos años después, y más allá de los resultados inesperados, o sea, o no tener los resultados esperados, podemos tener resultados que pueden ser incluso contraproducentes si no están correctamente diseñadas esas políticas públicas. Así que esa invitación final, todo el conocimiento, el nivel de profundidad de la investigación, que es algo que queremos hacer en Chile, así que la invitación para que podamos colaborar también en esos procesos. Y también el pensar hoy día en cuáles son los antecedentes que estamos conociendo y que podemos ocupar y cómo deberíamos enfrentar la implementación de políticas públicas a partir de esto. Lo queremos seguir conversando contigo e invitar a Rocío Faúndez, que Rocío Faúndez es la directora del nuevo servicio de reinserción social juvenil que se implementó en Chile hace un año, Rocío, más o menos, que tiene la tremenda responsabilidad de implementarlo, que no ha sido un proceso fácil, que viene avanzando a lo largo de Chile, partió en el norte del país y ahora ya se va concretando y tiene que seguir avanzando, que tenemos que ir recogiendo los aprendizajes, que se haya implementado por etapas, evidentemente nos da la oportunidad de poder repensar y poder ir rediseñando permanentemente para poder tener el mayor éxito posible. Y Rocío, Elena, nos va a acompañar un ratito, vamos a tener unos minutos de conversación contigo y tenemos algunas preguntas del público también que las vamos a ir canalizando con Rocío para que podamos mantener esta conversación unos minutos más. Así que muchas gracias, Elena, por tu presentación, muchas gracias, Rocío, por acompañarnos y las dejo a ustedes para que puedan seguir en este diálogo. Muchas gracias.
Por tu presentación. Agradezco además que a propósito de la invitación que me hicieron a comentar, también tuve la oportunidad de leer un paper muy interesante que trabajaste, entiendo, con Brianne McGonigal sobre procesos de justicia transformativa y transicional en Colombia. Muy brevemente voy a explicar un poco el proceso de implementación en el que estamos del servicio, al cual aludía recién Daniel, para luego comentar algunas cuestiones a propósito de la muy interesante presentación que nos hizo Elena. Efectivamente, Chile tenía pendiente dentro de su proceso de profundización del sistema de justicia juvenil. En Chile existe un sistema específico para responsabilidad penal de adolescentes y jóvenes hace muy poco tiempo, hace menos de 20 años, desde el 2007, y estaba pendiente una profundización del proceso institucional de reforma que permitió crear ese sistema de justicia. Entonces, por un lado, el servicio nuevo de reinserción social juvenil viene a formar parte de esa profundización, pero por otro lado también se inserta dentro de una línea mucho más larga y estructural de reformas que el Estado de Chile está implementando para hacerse cargo del paradigma de la protección integral de derechos de la niñez y de la adolescencia, y ese es un camino muy largo que el Estado de Chile ha recorrido en los últimos 34 años desde que Chile ratifica la Convención de Derechos de la Niñez y la Adolescencia. Y hago referencia a esta doble significancia de la implementación del servicio, por un lado asociada a justicia juvenil y a todo el tema de seguridad pública, claramente, pero también a esta reforma más grande, que podríamos decir que en el momento actual se encuentra en el desafío de que Chile logre consolidar un sistema integral de garantías y protección de derechos de la niñez. Hago alusión a esa doble significancia porque creo que algunas de las respuestas que desde la política pública estamos intentando dar
Because we are trying to provide some answers, as well as what Elena said, which are related to this double nature of the reform. For those who are connected from other places, also from Chile, and they don't know about the process, the law that creates this new service was published in January 2023. We have 1 year of vacancy. That means that it was 1 year to tune up all the organizational processes and strategies at an administrative parts. And we started the 13th of January this year, 8 months ago, in the 5 regions of the north of the country, between Arine, Parinacota, and Coquimbo. We will continue from January next year in 8 other regions in the south, from Maule to Magallanes and the Antarctica, so we can finally reach the central zone of the country, which is where 60% of the youth are attended only in 2026. Why was this implemented in this way? Because the justice system in Chile usually implements the reform in a gradual manner, so we can incorporate learnings out of the different implementation instances. And also because we've had recent experiences of implementation of the service within the reform to policies of children and adolescents that haven't had this gradual logic, and that has shown different complexities that are part of it. So we have this process that is moving forward slowly. And finally, in terms of the context, to explain from where my comments are coming from, is that today we have a number of youth that is quite restricted in Chile, 6,500 young people at a national level. Out of them, more than half they are over 18 years old. They committed a crime between 14 and 17 years and 11 months old, but today they are over 18 years old. And that also provides a challenge on how to give an answer of reinsertion to these young people. The law mandates a service to do a personalized or customized work because of the number of young people we have today in the north, where I lead. We have about 1,000 young people. Most of them are part of programs that are living within their communities, in the territories, in these municipalities with their families, and only a small amount is in prison due to they were condemned or waiting for the justice system to provide sentence, and today they're still considered innocent, but from court they're still decided to wait for their sentence without freedom. Having said all this above, I would like to start by highlighting the different nuances and the complexity of the involvement of the youth into the organized crime or gangs, as Elena presented. I think the idea of, first of all, that these criminal dynamics don't have a countercultural character, which is something that it is the assumption to which policies of reinsertion are structured. Helena has properly graphed from her ethnographic work on how we are not only facing a countercultural dynamic, it is a dynamic that is part of the mainstream, not only at this corporate image, but neoliberal level, as she mentioned. That's very important for the Chilean reality. Chile is a country where the cultural and social impact of public policies, the neoliberal policies, have a high prevalence. And this is not only part of it, but these young people represent a radical version or an extreme version of the type of dynamics that they are part of this type of neoliberal modernization that our society has gone through in the last 30 years in the case of Chile. This idea of this corporate name or branding of these sort of traditional gangs to these more marketing or neoliberalized gangs, I think is very enlightening. This idea of this sort of Uber system that some media has been starting to use, Uberizing this type of crime, that opens up this logic of young people that are part of a larger structure, but within the organizational chart, they are at the bottom side of this chain. They have a level of liaison that is very fragile. They're easily replaceable. Helena presented this very clearly. And it generates level of important alienation levels since they are not they don't know about the decision making of these structures, but they will be the poorest level of this organizational chart.
That is quite interesting because that invites us to know regarding transitional process after the displacement of people in Antioquia, because Helena develops there this idea that when you do the intervention through the vulnerability of rights, and you have people that are not recognized as vulnerable, or people that have vulnerable, or that have a precarity, clearly it will be very difficult for them to resonate, which is another verb that Elena uses that I think is quite relevant for a service such as reinsertion, the purpose of which is to modify crime behaviors. And that necessarily implies that the proposals for the engagement of the society you do to the young people are proposals that can resonate with them. They have to be able to resonate with their minds. From that standpoint, I was saying before that our service has a mandate to do a customized work, and from that I believe that to have a frequent dialogue with the academia, with youth, people involved in crime activities, and specifically with those that come from anthropology or from more ethnographic nature is quite relevant, because you can have a very good characterization, quantitative if you wish, macro, of the young people with whom we work. And in fact, this service has the challenge of having characterization that allows us to do typologies. So I think it's quite relevant when in Chile there is an idea. I'm not sure whether in Colombia something similar happens, a narrative between the staff that work in juvenile justice that we are vis-a-vis a new profile, a new, more complex profile. I work in jails of adults more than 20 years ago, and during the 2000, people hear about the new profile. There is a narrative that goes from generation to generation about this new profile. And I think it's quite relevant to have the typologies information about this new profile, because not all young people with whom we work today are part of this new profile that is part of transnational criminal gangs, regarding which different intervention devices are necessary. We do have in the north of Chile, where we have the service today, we have young people for crimes that were not seen before, people that were part of transnational crime gangs, receiving cars, for instance, or that entered Chile driving stolen cars, and clearly they were not the ones that stole the cars, or they are not going to profit with the sale of the car, but they're hired for a very specific part. They're not even hired in a flexible, as Elena mentioned, flexible, rational. We have young people with that profile, but not all of them have that profile. The quantitative data allows us to establish typologies that are fairly useful, to have intervention mechanisms that are differentiated, but I believe that ethnographic data, as the one that Elena introduced, are of the utmost importance to incorporate subjectivity of young people to the whole process. And I believe that it would be unfair from my side to say the new service provides that subjectivity because it is a challenge for public policies, clearly speaking. We do have participation mechanisms for young people, but those participation mechanisms, most of the time, have the problem of being way too institutional and in logics that young people makes no sense to them. But it's much more important, and that is something that the service brings in the mandate that we have to implement. How we incorporate in the design of intervention plans, which is the main axis of the service which each young people, the management of the case regarding an individual intervention area. How can we provide agency to people and participation in the design of the intervention plan? And in that way, the intervention plan can resonate with the young people. We, among the quality standards of the service, we have defined through an external advisory body several standards that have to do on how the young participate in the design of the plan. And I think that is the heart of the subjectivity, meaning that I need to understand what is the sense for the young people, the involvement in crime, what in terms of income generation, in terms of identity, does it make any sense for him? How the young offender can provide to their families, to children that they might have, which commonly they already have early on. I need to understand that sense so that the proposal that we work together with the young in the intervention plan makes sense to that person, to that young offender. Among the questions that we received from the audience while Elena was making the presentation, there was a question that I would like to address, and then I'll give the floor to more conversation or possible questions that had to do with the response from public policies are given in the case of Chile, and social juvenile reinsertion that I do can be given to realities such as the one that Elena has characterized. And I would like to refer to some few things. On the one side, to what we're calling from public policies, the simultaneity profile that has to do with young people that are being involved with crime, already arrested, but at the same time, they're subject of other services, which is the specialized protection service, meaning that when they were children or teenagers, they have lived a breaching of their rights, either serious or not serious in terms of violence within their families, neighborhood, neglect, not to have adults that can care for them, etc. In Chile, until a while ago, we had a single service that addressed adolescent youngsters involved in crimes, as well as children and young people that had breached their rights. And children also needed to create two different services for these two populations. The issue is that these two populations are fairly distinct due to the goals of the state. In one case, to repair the effects of the complex trauma and the breaching of their rights. In the other case is to modify the change of the crime and to promote the social reinsertion. But these are not so different populations when you see them in terms of their characteristics and trajectory in their lives. And you have many young people, whether cousins, siblings, or themselves in different stages of their life, have been somehow taken by these two services. And we have, in a national level, important number of people, young people, that are being arrested in social juvenile reinsertion, but also have needs of repair and protection. And that challenges the whole state to go beyond the dichotomy that people work with the youngsters. What Elena mentioned of moving from the idea of violent youth to the idea of violence that involves youth that in many cases directly affects children and the youth. In fact, we do need to work with these two groups in a differentiated manner. But if we want to have a systemic view, we need to coordinate ourselves for a powerful work that can see at the same time the young person as someone that has been breached their rights and they have repair needs from the state, but also they have been involved in crime activities. Historically, in Chile and Latin America, these two dichotomies have been present: the dangerous youth and the youth that lacks protection, that generates compassion and moves to charity, if you go to the rationale of 100 years ago. And what is true is that these are two radically dichotomies that are translated today in differentiated public policies, which was quite necessary, but at the same time, you need to go beyond the dichotomy so as to address those profiles and from the academy that the bulk of the young people in the juvenile justice have been, their rights have been breached throughout their lives. But specifically, we have a limited population that today is subject of both services. So we have a mandate from the Chilean government for both services, and we would add the minor service that exists in some places to work coordinately among ourselves, especially with these profiles that have important levels of involvement in criminal activities. And therefore, with them, the protection devices that are more traditional are not effective. But they do have needs of repair and interruption of their rights that have been breached and violated. So a first response from the public policies that we are piloting in some regions of the country, the idea is to have them at a national level. The idea is to have coordination mechanism for these groups that we call of simultaneous or dual profile that force us to go beyond a dichotomy between violent and dangerous youth and the youth that have been affected by the society and that require a care by all of us. A second response from public policies is that the reinsertion service has in its instrument, and the prior service didn't have, is the post-discharge strategy. If the children would like, the youth would like to do so, we can support for 6 months once they have ended their penal activities, I would say. And it's a sensitive period in terms of reincidence or relapse, if you want to think on that indicator, because sometimes the young people during that period makes a definition during the change of their trajectory, but they cannot make it sustainable if when they go out, they return to the same territory with the same network, with the same family across the board is involved in crimes. If they don't have a release mechanism that is at least equivalent to the amount of income that was generated in a crime activity. And that is not a precarious work with a low income. That is a work with a good level of income, where also the young person can have the perception, thinking what Elena mentioned, to have a labor life with higher levels of security. There is what we're talking about, a proposal that can make sense to that young person, competitively speaking, to their involvement in crime. So the strategy after the children have been released is a second public policy that could allow us to better support the youth in their process where they stop the cycle and stop the link with these criminal gangs in which they were involved. Thank you. We have no more time, but we thought that this stage could be a dialogue. So the idea is that we can ask questions to Elena so that she can, let's make the international knowledge and we can incorporate to the conversation. So in terms of presentation, and I'm very interested to be able to hear the reactions of Elena vis-a-vis what I mentioned. If there's any further questions from there. Yes, we have other questions. Director, maybe you have in the chat so that we can ask the question to Elena, right? Oh, I will start with the first. I have a few of them that Elena could comment. First, what is the role of the unlawful economies in the supervision and survival of the crimes?
Nos quedan 10 minutos, así que yo creo que podemos hacer varias.
Several questions, maybe. I think one is personally very interesting is what Elena has to say, is what are the challenges of the gig gangsters that you mentioned for the implementation of public policies, justice, rehabilitation, reinsertion? And in what type of market, unlawful market, beyond drug trafficking, have you been able to identify the presence of young people that have been co-opted by criminal gangs? In which other types of market?
I'll start with this one, but before addressing them, I will answer in Spanish. Since we have a Spanish conversation, I would like to thank you, Rocio, for your reaction and your presentation, and simply highlight that I fully agree with many of the things you said, and especially with this idea that we need to work together. So far, we have been working on children's policy that allegedly comprise adolescents but can be highly vulnerable of generating vulnerability. So agency of adolescents is not considered. On the other hand, policies support to the adolescents and the youth, but providing all the responsibility to the youth, and sometimes in adolescents are the young themselves that are receiving these contradictory policies. The state is in a contradiction, and in Colombia happens the same. And I think it's great to have this idea that these two entities of the state will work together, hopefully towards a view that will not be making them vulnerable or guilty of it, but will place the young at the core, as you were saying. Their voices, ambitions, and at the core of it. Reacting to the question I was asked, in terms of unlawful economy, what is the role of it? The role of it is essential. This is our organizations that have as main objective to profit, and it is an alternative way of survival in a context where finding a job and finding ways of earning your life is difficult. In terms of small children participating in urban sector, the drug market, and maybe less directly, the sexual unlawful work as well. These are different networks. So male teenagers that I work with mainly work on the drug sector, and female adolescents is evident in Medellin. This is usually managed by other male. These are different networks, but finally these are led by the same people. At the urban level, we can see a lot illegal market of households. So these poorly called invasions happen quite a lot. The illegal use of land where they are sold or rented, plots or houses built and they rented in it. These are taken by the criminal organizations, and that these are businesses that are more developed and larger. Usually these are managed by adults. So in terms of adolescents and children is microtraffic and controlling the neighborhood, being on the corner of the street, notifying what's happening, that sort of thing. Your question about gig gangsters and how this Uberization, as you call it, Rocio, of the organized crime. What challenges and what opportunities is setting at the public policies level? It is a big challenge, the categorization. Many of these young people, even if they're honest, that's a first challenge. If you ask them, if you're honest, they will not tell you that they are part of these gangs. Probably they're friends, they collaborate every so often, but understanding that membership or being in the category as being part of it is not necessarily the criterion that we should look at once we look at the population that we're framing our interventions. This is important in Medellin, in Colombia, because the policy from Petro's president in total peace and working with all the criminals in the country and having demobilization processes of all these groups are comprising also these gangs. And according to this policy idea, there should be some sort of demobilization process where the gang members will stop their criminal activities and their gangs to reinsert into the civil society. This policy is complex and it has many challenges, but the main challenge in terms of adolescents is to comprise all of these children and adolescents that are collaborating but are not part of this structure, not part of this intervention, how they will be benefited in a differentiated manner sometimes to be taken into account, because they will be tomorrow's gang leaders and we will not solve anything. This is essential for processes of leaving guns as well as for reparation processes that my paper is referred to in what you quote, Rocio. Sometimes these children are not taken into consideration as victims because the way that they are involved into these gangs is so fluid and so little characterized in terms of specific guidelines that are out of any protection or reparation program. That's a challenge. On the other hand, sorry, Rocio, I've been asked that she has a meeting with the minister. She has to leave us. So Rocio, thank you very much to be part of this. You know how important it is for us to have you here, and we trust that in the new service development will continue and all the collaboration we can provide. Please count on us as Fundación Paz Ciudadana. We know the importance and the challenge it has for our country. Thank you very much. You are dismissed, and please, Elena, continue answering the questions. Elena, you can continue with us. Thank you, Rocio. Thank you, Rocio, so you can go to that commitment you have. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. I just wanted to conclude with this reflection by saying that there are opportunities as well in this way of having this flexible involvement. We know about a lot of compared literature in other contexts when there are band models that are more rigid, where gang leaders are part of a clan and you are my brother, you cannot betray us, or otherwise we will kill you. So leaving those gangs is difficult. You have to negotiate this with the ringleaders to ensure that a support program to stop being involved will not be dangerous for the person that is part of that program. So in Central America, there are many examples of successful programs done by churches, because it's almost like they are the only institution respected enough. So the gang would say, well, it turned into a religious person, we will leave them in peace. This is not a hot-assist dynamic for children that I talked about. When we are at this initial level, but usually lasts for several years, almost all their adolescent years, on this involvement, it's relatively easy to live. Not easy, economically speaking or socially speaking. These children become dependent on this criminal employment. They had debts with their leaders, they have physical dependence to drugs. But if we can create economical and psychophysical support of fighting the dependency or addiction to substances, the bands will let them go relatively easily because they have so many others. So also because there's not a sense of belonging or fraternity you see in other models. I think this represents an advantage on how to work with this type of structure to which we can have access to. Very clear. Elena, thank you very much for being with us. It was an enlightening presentation. I think we have important challenges on the understanding of these phenomena to address them seriously, and you provide hope that this work with this level of depth and seriousness is necessary to be done. It has to be done. It can be done. In Chile, we are concerned about many background information that shows organizations that are working on the territories. There's a level of fear by the society because of the increase of violence in certain types of crimes. And we fully believe as Foundation that the only path that can take us to move forward by protecting the youth and solving these crime problems is through the understanding and establishing public policies that are successfully based, and we can replicate and solve the situation from it. Elena, your talk was enriching completely, and hopefully from this we can continue implementing public policies with serious evidence so can we move forward on the pathway we all want to go. Thank you very much. We will continue in 5 minutes. At 11, we will rejoin. Benjamin Lessing is with us already, so he will wait 5 minutes so we can have a small break, and then we can continue with the conference. Thank you.
Welcome again. We will start the second part of our conference. We'd like to thank all of you who are from different parts of Chile, Latin America, Caribbean, and different areas of the world. Thanks to simultaneous translation that we have at this conference. Next, we will have Benjamin Lessing, Director of the Research Institute in Narco Crime in Berkeley, and adjunct professor of political science of Chicago University. Benjamin is PhD in political science and a post-P doctor in the development of Stanford University. He has focused his career in organized crime, drug trafficking, and criminal governance, and also authors of 2 books addressing crimes against drugs. Benjamin, we are eager to hear your presentation. Welcome. And we have the screen so that you can you make your presentation. Thanks for being with us. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me and give me the chance to talk about my work and my view about the challenges of organized crime in Latin America today. It's a pity I cannot be with you in Chile, but next time I hope to be with you. Very well. What you see here in the screen is the expansion of a criminal group from Brazil that the name is PCC, First Capital Command. As you will see today, my research is about these type of groups. What you see at this time, as year goes by, how this group has expanded from its base in Sao Paulo to the whole country in Brazil. And certainly, we are in a moment of expansion of organizations, criminal groups throughout Latin America, even in Chile. So that's what I'm going to address today. And let's go there. First, I would like to introduce myself. As Daniel will mentioned, I am a political science professor, and I've done research about organized crimes for 20 years already. My main research project, my first book was about what was called criminal conflict, specifically conflict between criminal organizations and the state. On the one side, that's not so common. Most of the criminal organizations avoid sustained conflict with the state because they don't have the military force of a modern state. However, in Rio, Mexico, and Colombia, there were and still are standoff between drug cartels and the state. And the book wanted to understand why that type of conflict emerged. And the response that I will give you more in detail is that when the states do their crackdowns against cartels indiscriminately, the violent response of the cartels is to use violence against the state. And you see the explosions of violence in the region. But in some cases, the states have been able to respond on what I call conditional repression, which creates incentives for criminal organizations to avoid violence. I will explain more in detail afterwards. Just to give you a landscape, my second book that has not been finalized yet, almost there, is called Criminal Leviathans, and is similar, but it has another different approach, more for criminal groups such as PCC in Brazil, Vermelho Command in Brazil, La Maras in El Salvador, that emerge from the jails. They rule the jail world. They provide order within the jail system. And from there, they have been able to take and to establish a territorial control on the peripheries, on the shanty towns with low income. And they rule also civilians in these shanty towns. So the book focus on the criminal governance and what I call violence duopoly, the reality that we have in favelas in Brazil or in the shanty towns of Brazil, Medellin, and there were in El Salvador, at least before Bukele's crackdown, that the maras were the local authority. The residents have to obey the gangs, but they don't stop being citizens. They also have to obey the state, and they live in a duopoly of violence. I will be addressing more in depth that. And a third project that I will talk at the end, if I have time, is about criminal governance, systematically speaking, in Latin America. The idea is to make an estimation. How many people live under criminal governance? We don't have hard data yet, but we're starting. We're just beginning of the systematic study of criminal governance. So that is the outline of my presentation. First, my first book, which is Cartel-State Conflict, which is not so common, is not seen in many countries or in many periods, but in these three cases that I studied, it was sustained. The traffickers faced directly the state and sustainably. I will only talk about Mexico and Brazil today, but for those of you who have an idea, which is the whole image of that situation, let's go now to the drug war that began in 2003 in Fox president, but became versions of Calderon that you see in the picture. Calderon took office in 2006, and the war is already becoming hot among the cartels that drastically increased during the Fox government. And Fox already deployed the army in small areas. But Calderon, in order to deal with that problem, at the beginning of his mandate, he goes to Colombia, where he met with Álvaro Uribe, that at that time was the Bukele at that time. He was an extremely popular conservative because he provided safety, security, and the Colombians were very happy that security improved. And therefore, in that time, Uribe was about 85% of approval. And he had a friendship with Calderon that was not present yet, but he was going to become the president of Mexico. And he convinced to launch a war against drugs. And he said, if you provide security to your people, you will have the same rate of approval that I have. Calderon launches a war against drugs, seizes drugs, and takes to prison many drug traffickers, but that didn't end violence. On the contrary, to show how the violence increased, I have to change the scale of the graphic. Because when he launches the war, violence explodes in order of magnitude and has become stable. Not exactly in these levels, but roughly since the beginning. So it's the moment that Mexico becomes a very violent country with a war, a bloody war against cartels. And it's important to note that that increase, there was not only among people, drug traffickers, but among cartels and the state. It's the second line that you see here that I added. And these are attacks against military quarters by the cartels. Why? To launch a crackdown unleashes a war against the state. The other case that I use is Rio de Janeiro, a wonderful city, and as a city with a very tough war against drug trafficking. And I will tell you about Vermelho Command, because it's a main actor in the two books that I've worked. The group emerged in 1970s during the military dictatorship in the worst jail of the dictatorship. were the dictatorship. In order to empty the political movement against the dictatorship that was from the left side, and the left and the people were arrested together with ordinary criminals, just to relieve or take away some political nature of their arrest. However, the political members remained together and they practiced their collective action, staging protest, sharing the food among themselves, setting rules and order within the jail. And ordinary criminals that learn those techniques. And then, when the political prisoners were released in the 74 and 75, this group of bank thieves remain there, but already have organizational techniques, collective organizations. And at the end of the day, they conquer within the jail an hegemony and impose a social order in the jail, a social order that never existed before, that people never stole. There were no rape. They didn't fight any longer. And prisoners were joined to protest vis-a-vis the administration, requesting better conditions. It was a movement between political and criminal movement. And then, during the 80s, that group that became Comando Vermelho projected the power from within the jail to the streets. And then it changed from bank thieves to a drug trafficking group, a gang that brings to themselves drug traffickers that have certain power in the favelas. And they have a mutual support that allows them to share their troops, resources, money, and quickly afterwards, Comando Vermelho, they conquer all the micro-traffic market and all the favela of the cities, or almost all of them. And during the 80s, they have a monopoly. But at the end of the 80s, they begin to have certain divisions and fights. So then they break this monopoly in oligopoly of 3 factions that fight among each other, while Comando Vermelho remains in a standoff directly against the state. And since that time onwards, in 1985 until nowadays, it's almost the same thing in the Comando Vermelho dominates favela, militarily speaking, have territorial control. The police can enter, but together they have to enter in militarized operations. The police kill many of them, many people, but Comando Vermelho counterattacks, and in several times the states have occupied militarily with armed forces the favela when there are international events. There were about 7 interventions until 2017, but always, after a while, they leave and drug traffickers return.
The aggressive answer and challenging of drug traffickers is amazing. The state has greater strength. They have tanks and they're bulletproof, but you see, this is the war manual. The Vermelho Commando, it's facing military, like being with less military resources. They get trained for as it was a military action. And this is an example of 2007 that are challenging in this regard. All along this time, from the 80s up to 2007, what you see here are armed conflicts between drug traffickers and the state. These are death, drug traffickers by the police forces. And you see that it's very violent, more than 1,000 people dead per year from 2003 or 2. That it will be some sort of civil war. If it was a civil war, death on a battlefield. But it is not. This is the police killing civil people that are considered as drug traffickers. In 2008, the state launches the Pacification Program, or UPP, that is located on favelas, and they used by military forces, police forces with a lot of strength. And then there is community implementation where they remove the special forces, so the police will have the intuition and trying to establish a legitimate use of the force from the state. It is a program that slowly took the space of the drug traffickers, not finishing with the drug trafficking, and explicitly the state has the goal. We're not trying to end with the drug trafficking. This is happening everywhere in the world, but we are going to end with drug traffickers that are armed. And this was essential to the success of this project. Very quickly, it was successful, and it spread out to many favelas and to the most important ones of the city. This triggered an immediate drop in the conflict between cartels and the state. It plummeted to levels that we have never seen in 20 years. And it was used as a general offices, stations in the different locations. In that sense, it was pacified. Traffic didn't have a strong presence. Then pacifying Rocinha, the largest favela in Rio de Janeiro, and one of the largest in Latin America, that had another drug trafficking cartel with a lot of territorial control and power. Police went with no gunshot. They have changed something. Drug traffickers will not be facing them. Also in Manguinhos, another large favela. Myself, I'm there with the dean of the University of Chicago. It was so safe that I felt comfortable to bring him to the favela. That was July 2013. 8 months after, drug traffickers had attacked this base, this station, and then drug trafficking faced again and attacked the UPPs throughout the city. The program was decharacterized for many reasons because it had moved very quickly. So it didn't have this community police force character. It provided the drug traffickers to have incentives to attack against, and there was an economical financial crisis. They had to remove resources to the UPPs. So at the end of the day, it returned to levels that are not equal or large as before the UPPs, but larger between the conflict in the Vermelho Command and the state, and 1,530 deaths in 2018. This year is the year that Bolsonaro is elected, and in Rio there's a campaign of the governor saying, we need to allow the police force to kill more. So they promise that they will allow the police force to kill more, and that's what happened. Next year increased even further to 1,800. So it's more or less the same at this level, almost 2,000 people per year, and it is a very hot war. What is this explaining? Sometimes drug traffickers have a violent response, and they don't sometimes. The theory developed in this book, and it is applied to many other things as well, this idea of repression, conditional repression, is an idea that from that moment I've been developing, not only related to violence between the cartels and the state, but all crimes, all problems that the state would like to minimize, violence between cartels, or even the entry of the police force. Let me explain this conditional repression first. What I've seen in the cases under study is that the state would increase the degree of repression. They would deploy tanks, military forces, they would purchase more guns, so the degree of repression was expanding. What you see in this graph at the horizontal axis, the degree of repression was expanding. While doing this, it creates incentives to criminal gangs to respond with violence for many reasons, even due to corruption. Just because of the state has more power to punish the drug traffickers, they will have to shoot more. For many reasons, not only because of that, but because of many reasons, that increase of repression makes violence to seem interesting. If the crackdown doesn't have a conditional, there's no conditional crackdown. I go against cartels with level 10 of repression. Regardless whether they respond with violence or not, as I am showing in this graph, this will make the cartel to see that being violent is interesting. It provides an advantage to the state. If I'm not violent, I will not be able to respond. In other moments, the state would expressly distinguish and would tell the drug traffickers or the gangs, if you're violent, I'll go with 10. But if you continue trafficking in a non-violent manner or not ostensibly armed, in the case of Brazil, I will go with level 6. Nobody said drugs are decriminalized, but I will use less. You can have peace of mind selling drugs if you're not using guns or you're not attacking the state. That creates incentives, and only that creates incentives for drug traffickers and prevent violence. By only differentiating the degree of repression, only when this is conditioned to the behavior of them, that we create incentives for drug traffickers or gangs to behave in one way or the other. But there's a problem with any conditional repression. Sorry, other comment. This dynamics is part of what we call the focus deterred, a type of very common policy. Focus deterrence is a conditional repression. It's a way to do this conditional repression. Focus deterrence involved other things. Let's sit down with gang leaders. Let's give them incentives or a meeting with them. It's very specific for the street gangs. So it was developed in Boston, Chicago, and this specific manifestation of this mechanism that is more general. The problem, as with any conditional repression program, are two things. One, if the state is repressing too much to drug trafficking or the gangs or whatever, it is at level 10 already. To make this conditionality work out, they will have to decrease the repression to the nonviolent drug traffickers in this case. It only achieved this incentive with leveraging by reducing repression against well-behaved drug traffickers, and that generates political problems. If it's working out and it's actually is a dissuasion for the violence, then you see the drug traffickers are in degree 6, and everybody knows that they can repress with 10, but are only repressing with degree 6. What happens? Why are they allowing the drug traffickers there? We're not repressing them. Because in order to have a dissuade them, to punish them, they will use violence. That's why conditional, I usually say that it seems that it's not working out when it is. Just because it's working it seems that it's not working out. A hard hand is almost the opposite. It seems that it's working out, and I'm capturing the kingpins, or tons of marijuana has been seized, but I'm putting many people in jail. But sometimes it's not happening, and it's strengthening the groups. That's a problem. Having an iron fist, it seems that it's working out when it's not. And this conditional repression seems that it's not working out, but it's actually indeed working out. If you'd like to read more about this topic, I recommend you. This was published in The Economist, a summary of what just said, and you can read it. With the time I have left, I would like to talk about these new problems that are coming up, not only in Brazil, throughout the country. And this is a second project about criminal leviathans or street gangs. And I would like to talk about the PCC group, which is the most impressive thing, this group. As like Comando Vermelho was born under pressure, and it was born out of the state violence after the Carandiru massacre in 1993, where the state killed 111 non-armed people. And then the PCC comes out in order to protect. Nobody knew anything. It grew in secret since 1993 to the 2000. And when you look at the bottom, you will see that it was a time where the jail rate in Sao Paulo was triggered. It increased quite a lot, and it went from almost 450 people, and the PCC kept growing, integrating new members, new gang members, until 2001. A mega rebellion is launched in 23 jails at the same time, and it calls the attention to the society, the media, the state. And the state represses strongly to 2006 with new hard regimes of jails. And then the state is saying, no, PCC was disassembled, it no longer exists. What is that? And in 2006, another mega rebellion is triggered, even stronger. In this case, they would not only had coordination of lootings, and also in other neighboring areas. So it's starting to expand on the streets as well. And the PCC organizes and launches a wave of coordinated attacks to buses, underground stations, and banks in Sao Paulo capital, where it leaves the city completely stopped. They remove the buses, they take out of the underground stations, the banks are closed, the schools are closed for 4 days. It's the same until the state needs to negotiate with the PCC and give concessions, grant concessions to improve the conditions of the jails.
This year, I was impressed in January when there was an attack of drug cartels in Ecuador, because they used a tactic that PCC used in 2006, which was somehow to take as a hostage TV networks. They hijack a anchorman of Globo, TV Globo, and they forced to TV Globo to have a video broadcasting that they recorded. In Ecuador, they did the same thing. They took hostage of a TV network in Quito, and they broadcasted a video explaining why they were just struggling with them. And not only in São Paulo, but also elsewhere in the world, even in El Salvador, as we have seen, is that when the jail rate reached level 450, the gangs from the jails have a lot of power on the street. They're able to organize people in the streets to do that type of things, which is quite risky. To put a bomb in the subway, to take hostages, is quite risky. Why they do it? Because the people within the jail have power on them. Why? because they, in the street, they know that they will be taken to jail any time. The jail rate is too high. Everyone is going to the jail. They have the expectation that sooner or later they will taken to jail. When I say everyone, it's people who have an engagement in criminal activities. Gangs of people that biotype as possible member is not a member, but they know due to my biotype, people will tell me behind the bars. I need the help of the group inside the jail when I go there. So if they request me something, maybe I do it now. So when I am taken to custody, I have a good relationship with them. There were attacks in El Salvador, quite similar, burning buses and actions in a gang in the United States during the 90s. What is interesting about São Paulo is that not only they use this power for crime, on the contrary, they use this power to drop violence in the periphery or the outskirts of São Paulo. They started what is called the law of the crime that forbids lethal violence without the permit of PCC. They use courts, debates, they call it, with jurors or that are talking through a mobile phone, people in jail, to decide on a case. If you want to kill someone, you can kill it. You don't need to go to PCC. You have to explain with a court, a debate set by themselves, a debate of ideas, they call it in the PCC, and they have to persuade the jury that it's valid to kill such guy. And that's why, with that structure and governance in the outskirts, not only in São Paulo, but in the whole São Paulo state, they drop the murder rate of São Paulo dramatically. It was such dramatic, the drop, that it changed the trajectory of Brazil as a whole. If you see Brazil without São Paulo at that time, murder rate were increasing, but taking into account São Paulo, the curve goes downwards sustainably. Now São Paulo is the capital that least murder rate has in Brazil and has levels of very low murder rates. Causes are several of them. São Paulo also has a very professional administration, a rich city, but there's no doubt that the monopoly of the PCC and the criminal governance on the outskirts strongly affected the pacification of the city. So what happened? During the years after that attack, PCC began a colonial project to conquer or to expand to other states from Brazil. And at the same time, Remelio command, in their own way, many other local groups emerge. And what is happening behind that is that experiment in massive incarcerations that São Paulo always used to have now is starting to be copied by other states. Almost all the Brazilian states are starting to increase the incarceration rates, and in 2003, almost all the states had a low or medium level of incarcerations. In 2015, 16, 17, many of them skyrocketed more and more, with rates of incarceration that are extremely high. So that model of faction or gangs that controls the jails, and they control from that moment the streets, they address the whole Brazilian situation. PCC is quite aggressive and implements cells in each state, and since it's a very well rational, bureaucratic, organized model, they have census. They create internal agencies for the expansion, and in each state they have people providing weekly reports about how many members they have in the streets, how many members they have in the jail, which is quite typical from the epoch. As it would be a state bureaucracy, but more efficient, much more efficient than the state bureaucracy in Brazil, at least. Here we see in a weekly report of the White Book, which is the book of new baptized members. Whenever someone enters to PCC, is baptized and enters in a central record. And here we see by state how many they have: 2 in the streets in La Rua and 5 in the system, or 3 in the system, and throughout the states of Brazil. There you see that registry, and even Uruguay and some other countries. And we can notice here in the final summary that was in 2017 when it was expanding the PCC a lot. You see that only in that 15 weeks they baptized 339 people. Some of them new and updating of enrollment, the level of sophistication, because each member have their own enrollment number, and 4 countries where they have been baptized, and all the state of Brazil, they have baptized someone. So that was the expansion that led us to have a presence in all the states of Brazil in 2017. While that happened, I'm going to end. The Remelio command expanded in a different fashion. Their heads were all in jail. But it was difficult to control them easily because they controlled their business, because the state created a federal jail system, and they sent all the heads of Remelio command for that system. It was like a US supermax, high security prisons, isolation 23 hours per day, without communication, families, without communication with attorneys, electronic listening. They sent the heads of Comando Vermelho, and they are far away. The whole leaders of Comando Vermelho and Rio were sent to that prison. But what happened? The other states already began to send the heads of their own local organizations that were doing there for the federal system. And although they had an isolation, they began to know each other in the federal system. And they forged a network of partnership among local groups and Comando Vermelho. And the director of the federal prison system said, unfortunately, the federal system nationalized organized crime. Never before in the history of the country, the leaders of this crime have been united by the state themselves. And that created a network of partners of Comando Remelio that then they entered in conflict with PCC in 2017. And there was a wave of massacres in jails in the northeast area. At the same time, the attacks, as happened in 2016 that I showed before, these coordinated attacks inside the jail that before belonged to PCC and Comando Remelio in the southeast in São Paulo, they began to appear in other parts of the country, the south, north, northeast, and in the north. At the same time, the criminal governance also was nationalized. Today, when you go through the favelas of any city of Brazil, you will see these type of things. We have Comando Remelio AM, Comando Vermelho in the mid is BS Chota, in Paraíba. In all the different states, they have a local group or a PCC or a branch, and they have these regulations. You don't steal in the favelas, you don't talk to police, you cannot smoke maconha or drugs near the schools. So they impose their governance on the local population. And they do so as to win the hearts of the residents, a certain sense of loyalty. And they provide public order so that the state doesn't need to enter, because the state lives there, because there are no thefts, there are no problems, the police remains outside. But also because when the police enter, local people, residents, see the police as an invading force and protect drug traffickers, because drug traffickers are the ones that care for them or provide something for them, order something, things for the poor people. Good roles sometimes. In the center, where it says respect people, I took the picture. I talked to the chairperson of the neighbor associations, and he told me these are the rules installed by the local faction that is a partner of Comando Vermelho. But these are good rules, he said, and our life has improved. So there is a collective sense. They have that sense that we have to care for each other, for our neighborhood. So they provide a governance that is illegal, criminal, that is done by force, that's scary, but sometimes it's very efficient. And in the favelas of Brazil today, it's quite common that we don't need to close our doors. There's no rape. People can walk during the night. People feel safe, etc. So it's a governance that is efficient. Not always, but in many cases it is. And this is what the chairperson of the community told me. And not only we see that in Brazil, but also elsewhere in Latin America, Medellin specifically, where I have this research project with my co-authors, and we have identified the combos of each neighborhood, and we studied in the present moment so as to measure who govern the combos, so-called combos, and who rule on the state. But what is important to understand in this process is that the miracle of Medellin, the fact that the murder rate dropped dramatically from Pablo Escobar onwards until this process was done through the organizations of the street gangs that is called combos, in groups that could rule the periphery. So somehow very similar to what the Comando Vermelho did, or PCC in Brazil, where they have paramilitary committees in Medellin. They organized the combos, and they gave the mission to rule their own territories. And in fact, from 2001-2, when Goberna conquered the whole city and organized combos, there is a dramatic reduction of murder rates. There is a war, and there's a period that is called the Medellin miracle. Then a war was in 2008, murder rate increased again. But amazingly, because the structures are fragmented, but for another reason, because we're writing and trying to explain the groups that remain there that are called razones are about 12 mafia groups that control combos, yet they live in peace. They have an agreement among themselves, 2011, 2012, and since then, there's no violence at all. So it's not only Tom Berna that pacified Medellin, are the other groups, and also these are the combos, or groups from the streets that are organized in larger criminal structure that maintains and dropped murder rate in Medellin and transformed in a city that today is quite safe, and for many people is a model on how to overcome the problems. But the outskirts still are ruled by these criminals.
In fact, they tried to use these peace negotiations as a coin to trade. I cannot stop talking about El Salvador within this context because Las Maras are very similar in many aspects with the Brazilian groups as well, those from Medellin. Because Las Maras, this gang group, are born in California in the 90s, and these are subjected to a criminal governance from jails, from a group called the Maxima Mafia, or M. This group established controls on the streets from the jail control system using the same mechanism. As I showed you before, the rate of jails in California was huge. Latin Americans will know that they will go to jail and they will be in the M jails. And so they had to follow their orders. And what they did was to organize the groups of Latin Americans within a scheme of controlling the territory and charging taxes. Mareros, or Las Maras, was one of the groups subjected to this type of governance. Then they are deported, they go back to Central America and to El Salvador mainly. Then They start acting, creating problems, fighting in between them. And then there is a response to the tough treatment in programs in the year 2000. And there's also an explosion in the rate of jails. In those days, these are creating with the structure in the jails, and they transform these groups where the gangs on the streets that were independent, that barely have an affiliation to a name. Today, they are integrated and have a strong criminal structure, control from the jails, controlling the territories. They have the mission to control where it used to be the neighborhood, my area. Now they control a defined territory. And in Las Maras, they will extort people since they don't have access to profit markets such as drugs. They use extortion. So once again, this grows due to the state repression, as you can see in this quote of Viejolín, which was a member of this. Then we have a truce in 2012. The state helps Las Maras to have a truce, and this helped to drop violence overnight. It was highly effective. The government then takes responsibility, and then it starts dropping. There are some other issues. Another president comes in, and they said they will not continue with the truce. And in 2016, we see a cartel-state conflict time. There are strong fights between Las Maras and the state, and you see the violence levels that I have never seen before in 2015 and 2016. El Salvador becomes the most violent country in the world. In these days, Bukele is elected as a mayor of El Salvador, and he starts negotiating with the Maras in order to improve the historical center of the city. And so he starts creating unity in his government to negotiate with Las Maras. And in order to have this pact, I will help you. I will give you employment, things from the states. I will give you some employment, and you guarantee peace, minimizing violence, and you will help me with the elections. And with that, he is chosen president in 2019. And he drops drastically the violence after being elected and being in office for the first 2 years. In 2021, he has the majority of the Congress, where he is able to do all the less democratic maneuvering. So the Supreme Court and everything can work out. All of this comes from his capacity of negotiating with Las Maras and his governance capacity of governing the outskirts by minimizing violence and winning this popularity in his first years of being president. In 2022, and Las Maras once again have an attack killing many people. He has consolidated his power. Less democratic way, but he's in the position of declaring a state of emergency, a state of exception that is continuing of jailing 1.7% of the population. Something the world has never seen before, and having that crackdown of such a large scale that obviously it seems that he has ended with Las Maras. This was only possible because he had spaced out the democratic controls with his power. To finish, I just would like to ask why these duopolies persist in Rio, the favelas where 1 million people are living, a considerable number of the population. Why the state has not been able to remove the criminal control in these areas? I can ground that the state is interested to have it. By maintaining peace and order in the neighborhoods, the gangs will maintain the police outside, and the police is happy with that. They take care of the outskirts, and they allow these young people to take care of the community. The police is not concerned about these humble people. They just allow the gangs to do that. That's a picture from where I stay in Rio. That's my building. That's the entry of the favela. And the police remains there at the entrance. And inside, you have the drug traffickers. And that's how it is every day. There's no problem. It's peaceful. It is problematic, yes, but there's no problem in the day-to-day. And the result is that the urban outskirts are widely governed with micro-trafficking resources. It's the extortion or damage of the micro-traffic will finance these governance for decades, but the state will benefit out of that because these are well governed. They are safe, people can go to work, their homes are not violated, their daughters are not raped, they have a way to have problem resolution internally. It's paid by narco-trafficking, but the state doesn't have to place their funds into these communities. So why to monopolize the use of violence, legitimate violence? Why putting down this system of this violence duopoly system? I will start with that. That's what I wanted to say. Shall we have questions? What's next? Do we have time? No, yes, we will have some time for questions. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for your presentation. Highly illustrative of the different organizational behavior in Latin America. Without a doubt, it's a huge contribution to assess the public policy's impact for the organized crimes and understanding the incentives of different institutions to act in one or another way. All of these learnings are essential to understand and see the most effective path to improve security in our countries. To reflect on this presentation, we invited the regional district attorney, Hector Barros, who is with us, and he will give us a conversation for these minutes. Thank you very much. And now we open the floor so we can have a discussion with Benjamin. Thank you, Daniel. Yes. It was very interesting what Benjamin is saying, especially that we are in this period that is so complex with the presence of criminal organizations that we didn't have in the past in Chile and have been coming up due to unregulated immigration. In Chile, we have two types, and we have distinguished two types of criminal organizations. One that are traditional organizations, domestically, and those who are transnational that are coming due to the organized crime, which is mainly from Venezuela and Colombia. This is why it's so important to try to understand how to face this phenomenon, since what we have been doing or what the citizens expect from the state is to have more repression, and through repression to have solution to the conflicts generated by these criminal organizations. Nevertheless, it seems that that is not the single way. That's why conditional repression, I think, is a very interesting concept, but personally makes me reflect a lot, especially when we start talking about not repressing in exchange to have more social peace, or not having conflicts with the police forces or armed conflicts. But that also implies that what happens there is that we don't have state. It's the lack of state what happens in those places, since violence will continue impacting the communities. What I understand is that as the state is removed and these organizations, these criminal gangs, continue having control of the territories, that implies that there's also different levels of violence generated by cartels to their own gang members. We have always been debating between increasing prosecution, criminal and repression through the police forces, but on the other hand, repression in the good sense of the term, repressing organized crime. Also, those who said that we need to have an investment that is at the long term related to social investment. And because of this, and following your previous intervention where Rocio Faundes was talking about underage, I've always been questioning that the state needs to offer underage or from infancy alternatives out of being member of a criminal organization. But I see that it's difficult that the state will offer something attractive to underage so they will not become part of these organizations, because it's not only providing higher incomes or financial income equivalent to this underage than being in the criminal gang versus working. And why do I think it's complex? Because criminal gangs not only offer a financial aspect to this underage, it's a modern organization, prestige. They feel taken by this new family. Sometimes they don't have families. They become their family. They have also the possibility to be raised within this organization. So there are many things that are interesting to start reflecting upon. And the other thing is also what's interesting, listening to Benjamin talking about how criminal organizations start expanding in the world, especially Latin America, and what it takes us to the pondering on what is happening in Chile in the jail system. We have a large number of people from the Tren de Aragua gang installed in our jails. And what we are reflecting upon is whether these ringleaders are still from jail controlling the illegal markets outside jails. And we have this possibility of changing the jail system, of making it more strict. But according to what Benjamin says, it's been tested as well. It would not necessarily be having good results. And that's why I think it's very relevant to see the realities generated in Mexico and also mainly in Brazil with the existence of the PCC. And we also have an embryo here in Chile from them. They're starting or some intervention from the PCC on jails. And what it caught my attention, and I understand that now clearly, is that they will manage an organizational chart or a spreadsheet of their members. And it's quite strange when I see this in our research.
So apparently, the organization of PCC is different from others that we have heard today. Without going at length, because Daniel will repress my words, so as to say, I'll make a few questions from the audience that were sent through chat that are in the conference. The first question is, Benjamin, that I received. What lessons learned can we have from the Brazilian experience in regards to the criminal governance and punitivism? I'm not sure if I ask all of them or I go one by one. How you prefer? All of them. Secondly, how can the state recover the control of the areas ruled by criminal organizations without resorting to force or violence only? Thirdly, what role have the jails in the training and strengthening of the criminal organizations, according to your own findings? Fourth, how can the government in Latin America strike for a balance for the need of security with the protection of human rights in context of high criminal activity? Fifth, how do you see the criminal governance in the future, and what structural changes do you think are necessary to face that challenge? Sixth, which do you consider are the areas of critical research in the study of organized crimes in the coming years? And finally, what preventions of strategy preventions or organized crime have become effective without strengthening criminal organizations? Do I have time to answer all of them? We are a little bit delayed, but we can have 10 minutes. I think it's important to devote 10 minutes to listen to your answers, to take 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you for the comments and the questions. Very interesting and accurate. Well, unfortunately, I don't have the whole solutions for all of the questions. In fact, the title of my presentation is Unholy Trinity in Terrible Trade-off, which is the way that I've been able to think about these issues. But let's begin in the same order of the question. First, you asked about the Brazilian experience. And I would say that the Brazilian experience is fairly sad, because in its given time in the 80s, with democratization, there were many attempts to change their police institutions, to change also, and to face social exclusion. There was a positive wave, so as to say. But this wave didn't render fruit to change the police structures that were shaped during the dictatorship. Brazilian police has that problem of being an authoritarian police force, both institutionally, the way in which it was structured, and also in the way how they work. Not throughout the country, and always there are certain exceptions and reforms that are able to improve. But the police has always been violent and sometimes racist or with discrimination. And rather in these informal neighborhoods that more and more have an important role in the urban development of Brazil. In their cities, the major chunks of the population living in favela. In Salvador, is 85% of the population that live in favelas. So if the police see favelas as a threat, people under suspicion because they coexist with drugs, criminal activities, and they treat them as semi-citizens. They do search warrants without any reasons. They don't respect their major rights. So that people see criminal groups as a way of protection. And the police, throughout the years, whenever there is a hardliner that emerges with hard hand, let's leave police to work, and police kill more, and that strengthens criminal groups. So it's a sad story of the state trying to face criminal activity, but with a apparatus that hardly have more resources to rule. And that is a fruit against the war against drug. That is a failed drug. Repression and crackdown to micro traffic has two special effect in Brazil, but more and more in the region as a whole. First, to crack down a product that has a huge demand, and that demand we know that is inelastic. People pay whatever price for the drug. So if you forbid that product and you repress that business, and you able with all these state forces to drop this drug supply, that end up increasing profitability. That is an economic fact. If you restrict the supply of a good, of a product that has an elastic demand, profit increases, and that is obvious that that happened with the drug. drug is a very profitable business because it's forbidden and repressed by the state. So the state already created that source of profit, and that depends of controls of micro traffic control. So these are physical points, and that are the major incentives to control the territory and to maintain police outside and to rule that place, to control not only where I'm selling in the corner, but everything, so that people can arrive safely, so that they're not stolen regarding the purchase of drugs, so that the neighbor can call the police because someone stole things. So repression of drugs also, and breed that incentives for that governance. So there are many mechanisms which are different. So those efforts from the states end up strengthening criminal groups, and they give incentives to rule and govern. But in the Brazilian case, we have to see in which sense Brazil is different from other countries in their actions vis-a-vis crime. Massive incarcerations, with Brazil is the third country in the world in terms of the population in the jails. Violence that has a huge rate, 6,000 people that the police killed, but these are very strong numbers. And the fact that in spite of taking more prison to the prison and to kill more civilians, criminal groups are stronger. And for me, it's an important evidence that that cycle of heavy hand and repression, which is more noticeable, had created a deeper hole, a rabbit hole that we cannot get out. And the role of the prisons is crucial. In the same place, for instance, in Medellin, the groups were not formed from the jails, but they were formed by paramilitary and insurgents that came from the civil war, from the countryside. The combos were structured by rural groups, armed groups from the civil war. But throughout time, pressure works out because it's an excellent place to negotiate those agreements among groups so that they drop violence. And that bargaining power and to sign agreement and then to use that as a bargaining with the state has been so useful for the Medellin group as well as El Salvador groups. And these agreements are signed within the jail. So it's the only place where the heads of that group can find and feel safe because they are protected, they are saved in different areas, and it has been an amazing opportunity to reach an agreement and to have bonds among groups. Maybe it's a good thing. Look at the murder rates of Medellin and El Salvador. It's good that they have an agreement among themselves. At least somehow it's good, but at the same time, that have empowered them with political power, that capacity of not only articulating, criminally speaking, but also articulating so as to reach an agreement and to reduce violence. I think that the successful interventions, as they are successful, they're precisely the ones that use, unfortunately, there is a pendulum between repression, crackdown, and human rights. Repression and to be progressive or reforms. And repression doesn't solve the problem. People remain mad, and then you have someone will defend the human rights. But human rights leave criminals at large, criminal activity increases, and then we have crackdown. The problem in that scenario is that this strength of the state, which I said before, has a heavy hand is working, but it seems that it's not working. So we see people being captured with a heavy hand, but 5 years later, at the end of the mandate, it didn't solve anything. In fact, they're stronger. And then we have human rights or progressive forces, and they stop repression. but that doesn't solve the problem. I think it's neither one or the other solution, but to use the strength of the state strategically to encourage criminal groups so as not to use the most harmful violence and not to traffic with the most harmful drugs such as fentanyl. If you don't want to have fentanyl in your cities, you have to arrive to the drug traffic. Look, I can allow you to traffic marijuana if you don't use fentanyl. You can traffic even cocaine, but not fentanyl. If I see you with fentanyl, I will go with 10. But if I go with other drugs with 5, you don't do that. They don't need to bring fentanyl for their own cities. So you can use the force of the state, yes. The repressive force of the state, yes. But you have to use smartly to create incentives for criminal groups instead of thinking that you will end up for once and for all with criminal groups. You won't end with them because you hammer them without being accurate. You won't give any incentive to restrict and to behave in a way that you want them to behave. But if you take my advices and you implement conditional repression and you give them to the groups incentive to behave them, so the people who define what is a good behavior for a criminal, that they send marijuana but not near the school, that they don't recruit young people, that they recruit adults but not young people, that they sell heroin but not fentanyl, whatever. The society has to decide. But if you implement conditional repression for so as to educate criminal groups, to civilize criminal groups, there is a trade-off that we have to consider that is terrible. We have to accept that they will exist, they will continue to exist, as they exist in Medellin, in the neighborhoods, negotiating with the government, because they rule, they behave well, they have incentive to behave in Medellin, because the government negotiates with them. So that path might end up with the worst type of criminal behaviors, with the cost that you won't be able to destroy them. You have to accept them, that they won't destroy them, at least in the short term. In the long term, in my opinion, it is critical that the Latin American states should not let them, that the outskirts, poor outskirts, are left aside and neglected. Neglected because the criminal groups are more and more mindful that that is an opportunity for them, not only in Brazil, but what I didn't have time to show is that our study, that we detected criminal governance in all Latin America. There's no country, at least in the first estimation, there's not a single country in Latin America with less than 5% of the respondents that says that there is a criminal group in my neighborhood that sets order and reduces crime.
5% is not much. In Chile, Uruguay, or these countries, it's not so predominant as in Brazil, but it already exists. And if it does, it will only grow. So the state not only has to face these groups, the state needs to occupy the outskirts, reaching their citizens and providing a fulfillful life. And they don't have to look at the criminal gangs as an alternative. They don't need to go into criminal authorities to solve their problems or policing their neighborhoods or making their neighborhoods safe. It's very important that the states should start doing this so the problem will not get worse in the coming years. This mode that I talked today of the bottom-up organization from the gangs, where there used to be groups of young people at the corner, now they are articulated things between many neighborhoods, even from jail. These are articulated, and this is growing throughout the whole Latin America. And also the rates of jail time that are increasing. That's a very dangerous pathway. My recommendation is this. instead of inflating the jails, investing on more jails, you do need to have police forces, repressing forces, but you need to use this in a smart way. And the state needs to occupy the spaces that today are marginalized to stop that progress of the organized crime in these areas. Thank you. Thank you very much, Benjamin, Hector Barros, the prosecutor. And this converges at each of the components that we can face the organized crimes are all of them relevant. It seems that the most efficient mechanisms, and we can have better results at the long term, are focused on the prevention side, on the work on the youth, providing alternatives that will be diverse and attractive to prevent the crimes organization growing. And with this huge conference, and thanking once again to Benjamin, also Hector, for your questions and being with us and with his experience from the prosecutor's office, we conclude this international conference from Fundación Paz Ciudadano 2024. We'd like to thank the team of the foundation for their commitment, for developing all the multiple actions needed for this event to work out as best as possible. And we would like to invite you to next year to participate once again in the international conference from this foundation. And we are already thinking how to address and what will be the relevant topics to be treated. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon, and thank you for being with us.